It's about 8 o'clock or thereabouts. Today we're going to do 14, 15, and 16. And if you don't want to know any other rules, I would suggest, if you're a rules official, that these are the three that you know. Especially 14, because you got to know procedures for the ball. You got to know how to pick it up, how to put it down, how to drop it, how to move it, so forth. And then 15 and 16, you got to know how to take relief. More importantly, you have to teach or tell the player how to take relief under 15 and 16. So we're going to start with 14, which is the old Rule 20, procedures for ball. So let's go through a few of the definitions. First one I want to cover is ball marker, page 201 if you're following in the actual rules book. Ball marker, an artificial object when used to mark the spot of a ball to be lifted, such as a tee, coin, an object made to be a ball marker, or another small piece of equipment. When a rule refers to a ball marker being moved, this means a ball marker in place on the course to mark the spot of that ball. So the key to understand the new term ball marker is the second word of the definition, artificial. So, is a leaf a ball marker? The answer is no. Is a twig a ball marker? No. Is a stone a ball marker? No. You have to use something artificial. Second definition, club length. Next page. The length of the longest club of the 14 or fewer the player has during the round, other than the putter. That gives the example. If the longest club, other than the putter, the player has during the round is a 43-inch driver, a club length is 43 inches. So when you think about club length, understand that it is not the length of the club that you are measuring. The term club length has a precise definition, and it can vary from player to player. But when you tee off on the first hole or wherever you're starting, when that round starts, you have a club length, and it is the length, presumably, of your driver, if that's your longest club. So in other words, it's going to be 43 inches, in the example they gave. So if you are up by the putting green and your ball is on a cart path and you have a wedge in your hand, which most people would, and you then find your nearest point of relief and you put your club down to measure, that club may be 35 inches, 36 inches. So when you drop the ball 3 inches outside of that club length, understand that you have dropped within one club length. Why? Because the club length is not the length of the club that you are measuring. The club length is 43 inches. So the player then has dropped correctly if he drops 40 inches from the reference point. Drop. We're going to spend a lot of time on this when we get to 14.3, but the definition of drop is to hold the ball and let it go so it falls through the air with the intent to be in play. So it has to be with your intent. If the player lets go of the ball without intending for it to be in play, the ball has not been dropped and it's not in play. Each relief rule identifies a specific relief area where the ball must be dropped. In taking relief, the player must let go of the ball from a location at knee height. For those of you who don't know where your knee is, we'll see there's a nice diagram that shows you where your knee is. Bob, that'll be good for you to know that. It must fall straight down, and it does not touch any part of the body, player's body or equipment before it hits the ground. And as we're going to see when we get to 14.3, it can touch equipment or the player after it touches the ground. Relief area. I'm sorry, mark. Mark. Page 210, mark. The first thing to know about mark is it's a verb, not a noun. So when someone says put a mark on that, that is not something that the rules of golf understand. Mark is...
But everybody else does.
Well, yes, but that's true of a lot of things. But we need to go by definitions. And the definition of mark is to show the spot where the ball is at rest by either placing a ball marker or holding a club on the ground right behind it. So you can mark the ball with a ball marker, or you can mark the spot by holding a club on the ground. But what you can't do is put a loose impediment down or a twig or a stone. Why? Because that's not a ball marker. Why? Because it's not an artificial object. Relief area. Page 217. The area where a player must drop a ball when taking relief under a rule. Each relief rule requires the player to use a specific relief area whose size and location are based on 3 factors. So every relief area that you have is going to have these 3 factors. One exception is the dropping zone. When we talk about a dropping zone, that is the relief area. But other than a dropping zone, all the relief areas are going to have these 3 factors. The reference point, the point from which the size of the relief area is measured. Second thing is the size of the relief area measured from the reference point is either going to be 1 club length or 2 club lengths. The way you remember this is it is always 1 club length, except in one situation, and that is if you are taking lateral penalty relief. If you're taking lateral penalty relief, you're going to get 2 club lengths. There are 2 times when you can take lateral penalty relief. That's Rule 17, which is the penalty area, or Rule 19, unplayable ball. But basically, every time you take relief, you're going to get 1 club length except lateral penalty relief. And the third thing to keep in mind is there's always going to be a limitation on the relief area. And one of them is always going to be no nearer the hole. And the other one that is usually going to show up, and it's dependent on each rule, is it must be in a specific area of the course. Generally, and this is a general statement, if you're taking free relief, you're going to drop in the same area of the course in which the ball lies. If you're taking penalty relief, generally speaking, you can drop in any area of the course. We can see an oddity in the bunker, but other than that, basically, if it's penalty relief, you can drop in any area. In the last paragraph under relief area, it says, in using the club lengths to determine the size of the area, the player may measure directly across a ditch, hole, or similar thing, and directly across or through an object, such as a fence, tree fence, tunnel, blah, 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 but is not allowed to measure through ground that naturally slopes up and down. What this means is, and the way to remember this is that you can measure through air, you can't measure through dirt. So if you have a hill here and you want to go to the next hill and it's 1 club length, you can measure it. If you're at the bottom of a slope and it's a real steep little mound and it comes back down, you can't measure through the ground to get to the other side. You have to measure up and over. So you measure through air, but not through dirt. Replace. Top of next page, 218. Replace. And there's a defined term. Place is to place a ball by setting it down and letting it go with the intent for it to be in play. If the player sets the ball down without intending for it to be in play, the ball has not been replaced and it's not in play. That's the same rule with dropping. Whenever a rule requires a ball to be replaced, the rule involved identifies the specific spot. Generally, when you're replacing a ball, you're going to put it back in the spot from which it was lifted or moved. Last thing about replace is there is an interpretation that makes it crystal clear that replace means you must use your hand. It's just that simple. You cannot, if you're on the putting green a foot from the hole, and you mark the ball with a ball marker, and now you want to replace the ball, you can't do what the senior group does, which is to drop the ball, push your putter, have the ball right behind it, and putt it, because you have to replace it with your hand. What else do we got? Serious breach. Bottom of 218. Serious breach, and this involves playing from the wrong place. In stroke play, when playing from a wrong place could give player a significant advantage compared to the stroke to be made from the right place. In making this comparison to decide if there is a serious breach, the factors to be taken into account include, these are the four factors: the difficulty, the distance, the effect of obstacles, and the condition affecting the stroke. The second item, distance of the ball from the hole, is really the key. And it is always going to be a serious breach if you gain 75 to 100 yards. So if you hit your ball into tall grass, you can't find it, and you say, well, I don't want to go back to the teeing area, I'm just going to drop it here, you're going to get a serious breach. Why? Because you've gained a significant advantage. If you drop the ball 3 yards, 3 club lengths from the penalty area rather than 2, it's almost always going to be a non-serious breach. However, you could have a situation where the ball is directly behind a tree when you drop within 2 club lengths, but when you get to drop within 3 club lengths, it's no longer behind the tree, and you have a very easy shot, whereas the other way, you had a very hard shot. So even though you've only put it a yard or 2 off from where it should have been, the effect of that shot, the difficulty, is changed dramatically, and you would likely have gained a significant advantage. Last item is wrong place. Page 222, last definition. Any place on the course other than where the player is required or allowed to play his or her ball under a rule. Examples: playing from the wrong place are playing a ball after replacing it in the wrong spot, dropping a ball from outside the required relief area, playing a dropped ball, taking relief under a wrong rule so that the ball is dropped in and played from a place not allowed, playing a ball from a no-play zone. We'll talk about no-play zones when we get to 16.1e and 16.1f. And lastly, playing a ball from outside the teeing area and starting play of a hole or in trying to correct that mistake is not playing from a wrong place. It says 6.1b. You may ask yourself, what is this? Why is this here? Here's the reason why this is here. If you're playing from outside the teeing area, you're going to be governed by Rule 6, not by this rule. So if you tee your ball 2 inches in front of the tee markers, have you played from a wrong place? This is saying we're not going to be concerned with this rule, because we all know that if you're 2 inches in front, that's not where you're supposed to be. Is it a wrong place? You're kind of thinking yes. Is it a serious breach? Absolutely not, because it's a 500-yard hole and you gave 2 inches. It's not a serious breach. That's why this is taken out of here and put into the teeing area rule, which is 6.1b. So that if you do tee your ball 2 inches in front of the marker, as we know when we went over 6.1, that is a must correct. And if you play out that hole, even though you've only gained 2 inches of advantage, if you play out that hole from outside the teeing area and you don't correct it, it's a disqualification. So that's why that's here. All right, let's go and plow into Rule 14. Again, this is the old Rule 20, and it's procedures for ball. 14.1 is the marking and lifting. 14.2 is replacing. 14.3 is dropping. And 14.7 is playing from wrong place. Purpose of the rule. Rule 14 covers when and how the player may mark the spot of a ball at rest, lift, clean the ball, and how to put the ball back into play. That's Rule 14. When a lifted or moved ball is to be replaced, the same ball must be set down. When taking free relief, a substituted ball or an original ball must be dropped. As a reminder, that's covered under 6.3b, and we're also going to see that it's under each of the specific rules of 14. So let's look at the first one, 14.1. Marking, lifting, and cleaning ball. This rule applies to the deliberate lifting of a ball at rest, which includes picking up the ball by hand, rotating it, or otherwise deliberately causing it to move. 14.18. Spot of ball to be lifted and replaced must be marked. Again, notice the heading there. It says spot of ball to be lifted and replaced must be marked, suggesting if you're not going to replace it, you don't need to mark it. And that is, in fact, the rule. Before lifting a ball under a rule requiring the ball to be replaced on its original spot, the player must mark the spot, which means to place a ball marker right behind it or right next to it, or hold a club on the ground. And again, if you use something other than a ball marker or your club, you have not complied with this rule, and you're going to get the procedural penalty of 1 penalty stroke. If the spot is marked with a ball marker, after replacing the ball, the player must remove the ball marker before making a stroke. So again, that's somewhat odd. That's a change from the old rules. So if you mark your ball a foot from the hole, and you're, again, kind of lazy, you place the ball down there and you quickly putt it because you're not going to miss it, and you have not picked up your ball marker, it is a 1-stroke penalty because this is telling you you have to pick it up before you make the stroke. When a ball is lifted to take relief, the player is not required to mark the spot before lifting the ball. You hear that a lot. The ball's on the cart path, for instance. We're going to get to Rule 16. You're going to play your ball from another place. You don't have to mark the spot of that ball. 14.1b. Who may lift the ball? The player's ball may be lifted under the rules only by the player or anyone the player authorizes, but such authorization must be given each time before the ball is lifted. And this is the change for 2019 involving caddies exception. Caddy may lift player's ball on the putting green without authority. When the player's ball is on the putting green, his or her caddy may lift the ball without the player's authorization. The reason that this change came into effect is it's a speeding up of play issue. When the ball is on the putting green, what happens in 99% of the time? The player goes, he marks the ball, he picks it up, he hands it to his caddy, the caddy cleans it, he puts it back or puts it back. And what this is saying is the caddy is going to clean it anyways. Why not allow the caddy to mark it, pick it up, clean it, give it to the player, put it back? And so the caddy can put it back as well as the player. As a reminder, or as a precursor, when we get to Rule 23, it says it must only be done by the player. When we get to Rule 22 and 23, we're going to see in partner competitions for foursomes and four-ball, this would include the partner. The last part under 4.1b, if the caddy lifts the ball without authorization, when it's anywhere except on the putting green, the player gets 1 penalty stroke. So if you're on the fringe and the caddy picks it up, and he hasn't been specifically authorized by the caddy, it's a 1-stroke penalty, and you put the ball back. Cleaning ball. 14.1c, cleaning lifted ball. A ball lifted from the putting green may always be cleaned, we know that. A ball lifted from anywhere else other than the putting green may be cleaned except for these 4 specific circumstances. To see if it's cut or cracked, to identify it because it interferes with play, or to see if it lies in a condition where relief is allowed. How am I going to remember those, you say? Well, here's the way I remember it. If the player is lifting his ball under a situation in which he controls the lifting of it, we're not going to allow him or her to clean the ball. We're going to simply require that person to put it back. If the player is not in charge because someone else kicked his ball, as an example, the player has to pick it up and put it back. In that situation, the player can clean his ball. It doesn't come with under these 4. And the reason the rule is structured this way is if you didn't have these 4 in, then a player could always mark the ball, say I'm trying to identify it, pick it up, or he could say I'm trying to see if it's cut or cracked, or I'm going to see if it lies in a condition where relief is allowed. And then clean it, right. Okay. 14.2, replacing ball on spot. As the heading says, replacing ball on spot. When you replace the ball, you're always going to replace it on a spot. You're never going to replace it in an area. Replace ball on spot. And remember, replace means you're going to use your hand. So you put it on a spot with your hand. This rule applies whenever a ball is lifted or moved and a rule requires it to be replaced on a spot. So again, if you're on the cart path and you kick that ball, you don't have to replace it if you're not going to put the ball back on the spot. All right, the original ball must be used when replacing a ball. And you have the 4 exceptions, and the 4 exceptions, I think of them as kind of common sense exceptions to say the original ball cannot be recovered with reasonable efforts in a few seconds, so long as the player did not deliberately cause the ball to become unrecoverable. The original ball is cut or cracked after a play resumes, after it has been suspended, and the original ball was played by another player as a wrong ball. So let's go back to the first one. It says the original ball cannot be recovered with reasonable efforts and in a few seconds. So notice that it says a few seconds, so long as a player did not deliberately cause the ball to move. So you're playing TPC Sawgrass, your caddy is standing there, you're pretty excited, you're on the putting green, you pick up the ball, you've marked it, you picked it up the ball, and you throw it to your caddy to clean. And your caddy's pretty excited to be at TPC as well, and he's looking around, he's not paying attention. It hits the caddy and it goes in the water. Can you substitute a ball? Yes, because this says so long as the player did not deliberately cause the ball to become unrecoverable. This is a change in the rules. The old rule is if you were on the putting green and that happened, you'd get the penalty, and now you don't. Another example, and I always go back to my favorite hole in Wisconsin, and that's the 13th at Connemara. Thank you. If you are on the very front of the 13th hole, which is the elevated green, and you go to mark your ball, you pick it up, and then you set it back down, and you're kind of careless, and it rolls all the way down that hill 75 yards. Unless you can recover it within, quote, a few seconds, you can substitute. Again, as long as it was accidental. You can't throw it down the hill as a ruse so that you can then substitute. All right, 14.2b. Who must replace ball and how it must be replaced? The player's ball must be replaced under the rules only by the player and any person who lifted the ball or caused it to move, even if the person was not allowed to do it under the rules. So if you're walking down the middle of the fairway and a spectator or an opponent or someone else kicks your ball, what this says is that other person can put it back, or you as the player can always put it back. And of course, since you're always going to be responsible for actions concerning the replacement, you're going to want to do it yourself. But understand that it could be done by the person who moved it. So, example, if you're in the tournament and a little kid sees the ball in the middle of the fairway and he gets excited and he runs out and he picks up the ball, and his father or his mother says, gee, you can't do that. Who can replace the ball? Obviously the player, obviously the kid, but not the father. So when the father then goes and puts the ball back, that ball has not been, quote, replaced according to the rules. Parent 2. How ball must be replaced. The ball must be replaced by setting it down on the required spot and letting it go so that it stays on that spot. If the player plays a ball that was replaced in a wrong way, but on the required spot, the player gets 1 penalty stroke. All right, 14.2c. The ball must be a spot where ball is replaced. The ball must be replaced on its original spot, which if not known must be estimated, except when the ball must be replaced on a different spot under a rule, and this is 14.2d2 and 14.2e, and that we're going to go over that, but that's the situation where the lie has been altered. So the rule is you got to replace the ball on the spot. So as an example, if you hit your ball into tall weeds. Maybe you're out at Erin Hills, although I guess we shouldn't call them weeds. We should call it tall grass, fescue, whatever. And you're looking for the ball. And let's say the grass is sort of bent over because other people have been there. And if you're going along and you're looking for your ball and you have spectators, and the spectator says, "Oh, I just kicked the ball. Is this yours?" You look down and it says Dan on it. And you say, "Yeah, that's my ball." Now you have to get it back. So you have to ask the person where it was. And the person says, "Well, I don't really quite know. I think it was right over here." Well, you have to estimate the spot. Then you say, "Can I set it on top of the grass?" And the answer is no. You have to replace it in the spot. So you ask the spectator, if that was the one who kicked it, "Was it sitting real nicely on top of the grass?" And the spectator will say, "No, if I would have seen it then. It was under the grass." So then you have to take your hand, you have to reach down under the grass, and you have to put it in the spot that it was in before it was kicked. You do not drop. You must replace it with your hand. If the ball was at rest on, under, or against any immovable obstruction, integral object, boundary object, or growing or attached natural, the spot of the ball includes its vertical location, and this means that the ball must be replaced on its original spot. So again, the vertical location, I think we've talked about this. If your ball's in the middle of the fairway and someone steps on it, that ball, and it pushes it down, that ball has moved vertically down, and so now you're going to have to replace it. How are you going to replace it? Well, we're going to see under 14.2D, the lie has been altered, and we're going to see how to replace it. If any loose impediments were removed as a result of the ball being lifted or moved, they do not need to be replaced. For example, you're walking down in the rough or in the tall grass, and there's leaves and stuff, and that ball moves, and you've moved leaves. You don't have to put the leaves back on top of the ball. You just have to put the ball back in the spot. We're going to see some issues when we get to Rule 15 on that. All right, 14.2D. Where to replace ball when original lie altered. So why would a lie be altered? Sort of think of two reasons. One is some sort of maintenance vehicle runs over the ball. Another one could be that you have marked your ball so that another player can play because it interferes. They're right next to each other. That player takes a huge divot, and now when you go to put the ball back, that the area has been altered. If the lie of a lifted or moved ball that must be replaced is altered, the player must replace the ball in this way. Notice that these are two separate rules depending on whether the ball is in sand or whether the ball is anywhere else on the course except in sand. And notice the word sand means sand, it doesn't mean bunker. So it means anytime the ball is in the sand. When the ball was in the sand, whether in the bunker or anywhere else on the course, in replacing the ball on its original spot, the player must recreate the lie. In recreating the lie, the player may leave a small part of the ball visible. If the player fails to recreate the lie in breach of this rule, the player has played from a wrong place. So as an example, if you are in a bunker and you've been asked to lift your ball because it interferes with another ball that's right next to it, you have the obligation to know what your lie is before you pick it up. Because if you don't know what your lie is, how are you going to recreate the lie? And so if you have a fried egg lie and the player then alters that lie, the other player, when you go to put your ball back, you have to recreate the lie, which generally means you take the rake, you smooth it out, and then you push the ball in if that was the lie. Conversely, if you had a perfect lie in the bunker, you would then rake the area and then set the ball on top so that the lie is the same as it was before. Question?
Yeah, we have actually a terrific question online. Does Rule 14.2c apply to Model Local Rule E3, which pertains to preferred lies? And, you know, this has to do with placing or replacing, and if you're not putting it back on the spot. So it's a terrific question. But model local E3 is preferred lies and placing a ball other than the original spot.
Let me see if I can rephrase the question. I'm not 100% sure of the question, but the question is, if you're playing model local rule E3, which is the preferred lie, which as I recall means you pick the ball up and then you place it within one club length. Isn't that some parameters? I think then the question is, does 14.2c apply to that situation? And I guess I'm not understanding the question on why it wouldn't apply. You have, if model local rule says you have to replace it in a different spot, you have to replace it in a different spot. Is there?
You could even put it back on the original spot under the preferred lies rule.
Okay. Well, maybe if that question wasn't satisfactorily answered, maybe the person can.
And then he's asking the same question for 14.2d. If your lie was altered when playing under preferred lies, I guess my cynical answer would be, if the lie's been altered and you can put it within a club length, put it on a different spot.
Maybe
I think the answer is the reason you have the preferred lies is to get away from these two rules.
Correct.
You know,
yes.
This essentially overrides these rules and gives you permission to do something that these rules do not require.
Maybe the question they're asking is, can you do it in a two-step process by first taking relief under 14.2d and then you take additional relief under the preferred lies, so that the player then gets, if you will, a choosy or a choice of which lie he likes better? I think the answer to that question is yes. All right. The second part of 14.2d is ball anywhere except in sand. So now we're talking about a situation where your ball, let's say it's in the middle of the fairway, and a maintenance vehicle runs over and pushes the ball down into the ground. What this says is, ball anywhere except in sand, the player must replace the ball by placing it on the nearest spot with a lie most similar to the original lie, that is, within one club length, not near the hole, same area of the course. So if the maintenance vehicle runs over your ball, the lie has been altered. What you need to do is that you need to then pick up that ball and replace it. The spot that you're going to place it in is not anywhere within one club length. It is the nearest spot with the lie most similar, which if you think of a fairway, that probably means 3, 4, or 5 inches away from where it was pushed into the ground. And then you place the ball there.
So Dan, on that, you cannot restore the original lie and replace on the spot.
That's correct. Excuse me. The question posed was under 14.2d2, ball anywhere except in sand. The question was, if your ball was in the fairway and someone stepped on it, could you then repair the ball marker and set it on top of that repaired ball marker? And the answer is no, because the rule says you must place it in the nearest spot with a lie most similar to the original ball, which again in a fairway situation probably is 3 or 4 inches away. Now you could have an odd situation if your ball is in the middle of the fairway in a sand-filled divot and another player comes along, the ball's the same place, alters a lie, and now you have to put it back. You have to find a sand-filled divot within one club length. If you can't find one, you're probably going to have to put it into the slightly altered original sand-filled divot, if that is the most similar lie. And that's the key. You're looking to find the most similar lie within one club length.
Okay. The question online, forward me the pictures of the question. It says, does 14.2d apply to model local rule E3 or preferred lies if your original ball was at rest in a divot to start? And there, your original lie hasn't been altered. You're lying in a divot and you can prefer your lie. So hopefully that answers that question. The next question is, does model local rule, model local rule E3 states use the procedures under 14.2b2, which is how the ball must be replaced. and 14.2E, which is what to do if the ball does not stay on the original spot. Want to address that?
Yes, so we're talking about model local rule E3, which is the preferred lies. Excuse me, the preferred lie. If the ball is lying in a divot hole in the center of the fairway, now you are allowed under E3 to have preferred lies. That situation has nothing to do with 14.2D because the lie has not been altered. So you would simply follow model local rule E3, which generally speaking, I believe that's the one club length, then you place the ball.
Then the guy says, it has been described to, and this is a guy that does what I do, so it has been described to me by other rules officials that only rule 14.2B2 and 14.2E apply to model local rule E3. No other rules in 14 apply to model local rule E3. I think if you're proceeding under the model local rule E3 of preferred lies and you attempt to put your ball on a spot and it doesn't stay on that spot, whether you can try again has nothing to do because you're not replacing the ball. You are placing the ball in a different spot. But I am curious because the model local rule, I have it right here, it says the last paragraph, model local E3 says, in proceeding under this local rule, the player must choose a spot to place the ball and use the procedures for replacing a ball under 14.2B2, which is how the ball must be replaced, and 14.2E, what to do if the replaced ball does not stay on the original spot.
And we're going to go to over 14.2E in just a minute, but that's the rule that says if the ball doesn't, you go to replace it or place it, the ball doesn't stay there, you're then going to move the ball to a spot where it will come to rest. All right, so let's look at 14.2E, just what we're talking about. What to do if replaced ball does not stay on original spot? If the player tries to replace a ball, but it does not stay on the original spot, the player must try a second time. If the ball again does not stay on that spot, the player must replace the ball by placing it on the nearest spot where the ball will stay at rest, but within these limits. Basically, you got to stay within the same area of the course, except on the putting green, you can move it off the general area. So if your ball is stuck on the very front, maybe it embeds in the putting green on the very front of the 13th hole at Oconomowoc, and then you fix the ball marker and you go to replace it, you then, if it does not stay on that spot, when you go to replace it a second time, you have to find the spot that it will stay at rest that is nearest to where it is, which in theory could be on that hole moving to the side, but you can't go closer to the hole.
And interpretation 14.2E/1 talks about a ball in a slope bunker up against the rake. You move the rake, the ball moves. You're trying to find a spot in the bunker. You can't. Finally, you have to decide to take it unplayable. What is the reference point for that unplayable? Is it where it originally was by the rake? Because it doesn't say in that interpretation. It just says you're going to take it unplayable outside the bunker because you have to take a penalty stroke. But I just want to know where the reference point was for that.
The question that is posed is if you are trying to take an unplayable ball relief and you can't get the ball, you're trying to take relief from a bunker and you can't get the ball to stay at rest and you therefore have to take an unplayable ball, what is the reference point under Rule 19? We're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but we'll see that the reference point is where the ball originally lied. All right, let's look at Rule 14.3, dropping ball in relief area. Notice how how that very short phrase, dropping ball in relief area, tells you that when you're dropping the ball, you're not going to drop at a spot. You're always going to drop in an area. This is a change from the old rules. So you replace on a spot, you drop in an area. This rule applies whenever a player must drop a ball in taking relief under a rule, including when the player must complete taking relief by placing a ball under 14.3C2. 14.3C2 is the drop, place rule, which we'll go over in a minute. All right, 14.3A, original ball or another ball may be used. The player may use the original ball or another ball. This means that the player may use any ball each time he or she drops or places a ball under this rule. So notice what that says. Each time he or she drops or places. At the recent Girls State Golf Tournament on the first hole at University Ridge, we had one of the top players in the state who was going to have to drop her ball on a cart path. And then she looked at me and she says, if I drop this ball, it's going to get scraped. And if it rolls outside, does that mean I can get a new ball? And I looked at her and I said, yes, it does. And she says, I thought so. And then she dropped and the ball rolled out. And she says, no, I can drop another ball. And I said, yes, you can. And then she dropped it again and it rolled out again. And she says, now can I use another ball? And I said, yes, you can. And then she placed the ball on the cart path. Because each time you either drop or place, you can substitute balls. 14.3b, ball must be dropped in right way. The term right way is a term of art, a defined term, if you will, under this section, and it has three components. Player must drop ball. The ball must be dropped only by the player, and of course in partner play, that means or the partner. Either the player's caddied or anyone else may do so. Secondly, the ball must be dropped straight down from knee height without touching player or equipment. The ball must be let go from a location at knee height so that the ball falls straight down and does not touch any part of the body or equipment before he hits the ground. Knee height means the height of the player's knee when in the standing position. So we have a nice drawing at 14.3b that tells everybody where your knee is. And you'll notice that it's kind of halfway between your hip and your foot. And that's what you got to drop it from. The third component of dropping a ball in the right way is the ball must be dropped in the relief area. The ball must be dropped in the relief area. The player may stand either inside or out. If the ball is dropped in a wrong way in breach of one of or more of these three requirements, the player must drop a ball again in the right way, and there's no limit on the number of times the player must do so. A ball dropped in the wrong way does not count as one of the two drops under the 14.3C2 rule. So look at the drawing on 14.3C, and that is a very helpful diagram. So the person in the first panel, it's the player herself. She is dropping the ball straight down from knee height. And the third requirement is she drops it in the relief area. So that player has dropped, quote, in the right way. Second panel, it's the player. She drops it knee height, straight down, and she drops it in the relief area. So in the second panel, the player has dropped in the right way. She gets a red check mark. We'll see why in just a minute, but understand that she has dropped in the right way. She's followed the right procedure. Third player. The third panel, it's the player. She's dropped from knee height, but she didn't drop it in the relief area. She dropped it outside the relief area. So the third panel, this player did not drop in the right way. She dropped in the wrong way. So we're now going to see what happens if you drop it in the wrong way. But let's go back to the first panel. So if the player plays the ball after taking that procedure, she's not going to get a penalty. Why? Because she dropped in the right way. She played from the relief area. The player in the second panel, if she plays it from there, what's she going to get? Strangely enough, she's going to get a two-stroke penalty. Why? Because she followed the right procedure. She dropped it the, quote, right way, but she will have played it from the wrong place. The third player, the third panel, she has a one-stroke procedural penalty because she did not follow the right procedure. She did not drop in the right way. So she gets 1 stroke. Notice that she did, however, drop and played from the correct spot, so she does not get a 2-stroke penalty from playing from the wrong place. And as a reminder, if we were on panel 3, if this player dropped in the wrong way and it landed outside and did not roll back in, would she get 1, would she get 2, or would she get 3 penalty strokes? She would get 2. Why? Because she gets 1 of the procedural penalty, then she gets 2 for playing from the wrong place, and then we have the cap on penalties under 1.3C4, which says we disregard the procedural penalty if the player otherwise is going to get a 2-stroke penalty for playing from the wrong place. Bill, go ahead.
Why is the title of Rule 14.3B23, right now it's entitled "Ball must be dropped in the relief area"? Why does it not say the dropped ball must land in the relief area, or the dropped ball must first strike a part of the course in the relief area? Because it almost implies that the ball must be dropped in the relief area. Sounds like you've got to stand in the relief area, and that's not true.
All right, for those online who didn't hear that, Bill was suggesting that the drafters could have drafted the language in a slightly clearer fashion. Let's stipulate to that, and then we will move on.
Well, then you'd have to change the ball must be played from within the team here.
All right.
Same argument.
The rest of
but your feet can be outside.
the rest of 14.3.
Well, never.
The rest of 14.3b is if the player does not drop again and instead makes a stroke at the ball from where it came to rest after dropping in the wrong way, and this is what we just went over. If the ball was played from the relief area, the player gets 1 penalty stroke, but not from the wrong place. But if the ball was played from outside the relief area, you're going to get the general penalty. Or if it was placed when required to be dropped, you're going to get the general penalty. Under the old rules, we said there was a rules decision that says if you drop instead of place or place instead of drop, it's an automatic 2-stroke penalty. The new rule changes it slightly, but I suggest to you that the outcome is going to be exactly the same. In 99% of the cases, if you drop instead of place or place instead of drop, you're going to get a 2-stroke penalty. And the reason is if you place instead of drop, the rule says it's automatically the general penalty. And then it says if you drop instead of place, you're going to get a 2-stroke penalty unless the ball winds up in exactly the correct spot. And I would suggest to you, if you have to replace a ball or place a ball on a spot, when you drop it from knee height, the chances of it winding up on exactly that spot are not very good. So the practical reality is if you drop instead of place or place instead of drop, you're going to get the general penalty. All right, 14.3C. So now we have determined that the ball has been dropped in the right way. You've used the right procedure as shown by the player in diagram 14.3C. Pair number 1. Player has completed taking relief when ball is dropped in the right way and comes to rest in the relief area. If it does not matter whether the ball, after hitting the ground, touches any person, equipment, or other outside influence before coming to rest. The ball comes to rest in the relief area, the player has completed taking relief. If it goes outside, the player has to redrop. So in situation number 2, on the diagram there, diagram 14.3C, the player drops in the right way. Assume now, instead of coming to rest outside, it drops, it hits her foot, and rolls back in the relief area. Has she dropped in the right way? Yes. Has she played, or will she play from the relief area? Yes. And this rule is saying we don't care that it actually touched her foot after it already has hit the ground. In either case, there's no penalty to any player if a ball dropped in the right way accidentally hits any person, equipment, or other outside influence before coming to rest. And then we're going to see the exception is if you do it deliberately, that's a whole nother ballgame. All right, 14.3c, parent 2, what to do if ball dropped in right way comes to rest outside relief area. This is also known as the drop, drop, place rule. If the ball, if the ball comes to rest outside the relief area, the player must drop a ball in the right way a second time. If that ball also comes to rest outside the relief area, the player must then complete taking relief by placing a ball using the procedure for replacing the ball under 14.2b. So you drop it, and then you're going to place it where it hit the course. The player must place a ball in the spot where the ball dropped the second time. First touch the ground. If the placed ball does not stay on that spot, you must try a second time. And if it still doesn't, then you're going to go to 14.2e, which is the section that says if it doesn't stay at rest, you're going to find the nearest spot. We had an interesting situation at Erin Hills. It was, I believe it was the Marquette tournament. It was a college tournament. And it was the 15th hole, which is the drivable par 4, or at least for those players, it's a drivable par 4. And a player hit his ball, and it's an elevated green, and the ball came to rest in the sprinkler head on the very front of the green. And it's a very closely shaved area there. And the player's question for me before he picked it up, which I thought was smart of the player, he said, look, if I get relief, right? I said, yes, you do. He says, well, if I drop this, it's going to roll down into this bunker. Is that right? I said, well, I don't know where it's going to go, but the odds are pretty good. And he says, so then I do it again, right? And I said, yes, you do it again. Then what? I said, well, then you get to place it. And he says, well, it's not going to stay there. And I said, well, we don't know until you try it, but you then need to place it. And he says, well, what do I do? Well, you proceed under 14.2e, and then you go down the hill until you find the spot. Is he ever going to get in the bunker? No, because 14.2e says you got to stay in the same area of the course, which means the general area. Right. And the ball originally was not on the putting green. It was on the sprinkler head, which was just off.
If you want to continue the thought, right?
If it didn't stay on the spot the first time.
Right.
Yeah.
Correct.
But take it all the way to the thought.
Yes.
Drop, place, nearest.
All right, 14.3d, what to do if ball dropped in right way is deliberately deflected or stopped. Well, obviously as rules officials, we often know the difference between deliberate and accidental, but notice that this rule is the same as I think John must have gone over when he covered Rule 11. The first bullet point says a person deliberately touches the ball in motion. We all know that. That's deliberate. But the second bullet point, a ball in motion hits any equipment or other object or person, such as a caddy, that a player deliberately positioned or left in a particular location so that the equipment, object, or person might deflect or stop the ball. So if the player on 15, if he had set his bag a foot or two down the hill so that the ball would then drop and hit his bag, he has now breached this rule because he has, quote, deliberately deflected the ball. Why? Because he placed his bag in a position and then left it there knowing that it might deflect or stop the ball. When the ball is dropped in the right way, is deliberately deflected or stopped by any person. Before it comes to rest, the player must drop again using the procedure in 14.3b, which means that the ball that was deliberately deflected or stopped does not count as one of the two drops. If the ball was deliberately deflected or stopped, that player gets the general penalty. And then there's an exception when there's no reasonable chance that the ball will come to rest in the relief area. What that is saying is that if you drop your ball on a very steep hill and it's moving pretty quick south, and you know it's reasonable it's going to go another 75 yards down the hill, such as the 13th Atacama Walk, this is saying if there's no reasonable chance that it's going to come to rest, you can pick it up. You can do that even if the ball is still in the relief area, as long as it's reasonable to conclude that it's not coming to rest in the relief area.
Another example would be if you're dropping on a bank by a penalty area and you're taking relief from the penalty area, and the ball was rolling from the general area back into the penalty area, and there was no reasonable chance that it would come back out, you could stop the ball from going in the water.
For those online, the comment was that the same rule would apply if you were taking relief from a penalty area. You were dropping on a severe bank, and the minute you dropped it, it was heading very fast and hard towards the penalty area. You could pick up the ball before it actually went into the penalty area, save yourself the $3 for the price of the Titleist, and you $4, Bill said, and you come under exception to 14.3D. You can. The question is, can you position your caddy to catch the ball? The answer is yes, but you have to first have the predicate of this exception, which is there's no reasonable chance that the ball will come to rest. But the caddy could actually touch it while it is still in the relief area. That is correct. All right, 14.4. When player's ball is back in play after original ball was out of play. When a player's ball in play is lifted from the course or is lost out of bounds, the ball is no longer in play. The player has a ball in play again only, circle the word only, if you come under one of these two bullet points. You play the original ball or another ball from the teeing area, or you replace, drop, or place the original ball or another ball on the course with the intent for that ball to be in play. This rule has to be read in conjunction with the teeing area rule, 6.2b. If you read this literally, this is more of the general rule, and you have to bear in mind 6.2b. We've talked about this. So let me give you an example. The first bullet point says, plays the original ball or another ball from the teeing area. And the next one says, replaces or drops the original ball or another ball on the course with the intent for it to be in play. If you just read this, you would assume that if you hit a ball out of bounds, you go back to the teeing area, and for some reason you decide to drop the ball. You hold it at knee height, you drop it into the relief area. This would suggest that the ball is in play. If you read bullet point 2. That is incorrect. That ball is not in play. The way to read this rule is you need to insert the words when proceeding under Rule 14.6a. So I would read this to say, play the original ball or another ball from the teeing area, and I would insert when proceeding under Rule 14.6a. Then in the next line where it says, replaces, drops, or places the original ball or another ball on the course, I would insert, except when proceeding under Rule 14.6a. So what does that mean? What this rule is saying is if you're going back to the teeing area, and you either drop it or place it or somehow do whatever you want. If you're playing again under 14.6a, that ball is not in play until you make a stroke. So you go back to the teeing area, you've hit your ball out of bounds, you've played from a par 3, and it's your practice on a par 3 not to tee the ball. So you go back to the teeing area, you drop your ball from shoulder height in the teeing area, and you play the ball. Do you get a penalty? No. I mean, you don't get you get a penalty for the stroke and distance, but you don't get a penalty for an improper drop. Why? Because the ball's not in play. The ball's not in play until you play it from the teeing area. And you can, when you're playing again from the teeing area, you can tee it, you can put it on the ground, you can throw it. You just have to play it from the teeing area. So when you read 14.4, that's why you have to consider the fact that if we're talking about the teeing area rules, we're going to have an exception for that ball being in play. All right, if the player returns the ball to the course in any way, and you have to have that exception again, except when we're proceeding under Rule 14.6a, with the intent for the ball to be in play. The ball is in play even if it was substituted for the original ball when not allowed, or replaced, dropped in the wrong place, so forth. All right, Rule 14.5. This was a so-called eraser rule. This used to be the old 20.6. Correcting a mistake made in substituting, replacing, dropping, or placing ball. Notice what is not on that list of 4. What is not on that list is lifting. This rule does not apply when you incorrectly lift your ball. If you incorrectly lift your ball, you're going to get a penalty, and you're not going to be able to escape it by going under 14.5, because 14.5 only deals with correcting mistake made in substituting, replacing, dropping, replacing. 14.5a. When a player has substituted another ball for the original ball when not allowed under the rules, or when the player's ball in play was replaced, dropped, or placed in a wrong place, or came to rest in a wrong place, or in a wrong way, or by using a procedure that did not apply, the player may lift the ball without penalty and correct the mistake before you make the stroke. So you're in the middle of the fairway, you hit the ball out of bounds, you now have to drop, and you drop from shoulder height. And before you hit it, someone says that you dropped that incorrectly. What this is saying is that you can correct that because you've made an incorrect drop. So you pick it up, knee height, and then you drop it correctly. Another example would be you're on a cart path, you measure 2 club lengths, you drop it 2 club lengths, and someone says, wait a minute, you only get 1 club length. As long as you haven't played the ball, what this is saying is that you get to correct the error. So you pick the ball up and you drop it correctly. 14.5b. One player may change to a different rule or relief option when correcting a mistake in taking relief. This is a very nice change to the rules. This section used to be in 5 or 6 different decisions. They were impossible to understand. They were impossible to find in the rules. Now we have it in one spot. When correcting a mistake and taking relief, whether the player must use the same rule and relief option originally used or might change to a different rule or relief option depends on the nature of the mistake. And we got parent 1, parent 2, and parent 3. So parent 1 is you proceed under a wrong rule. A wrong rule doesn't apply. 2 is you proceed under the right rule, but you drop it in the wrong place. And 3 is you proceed under the right rule in the right place, but for some reason you have to redrop it. An example would be it rolls out of the relief area. So let's look at the first one. When ball was put into play under a rule that did not apply. In correcting the mistake, the player may use any rule that does apply. And that makes sense. If you're not proceeding under the applicable rule, then you can proceed under any rule that is applicable. And they give the example if you mistakenly took unplayable ball relief from a penalty area, which you're not allowed to do. The player must correct the mistake by either replacing the ball if it had been lifted under 9.4 or taking penalty relief under Rule 17 and may use any relief option under that rule. Give some thought to whether if a player does in fact do that and he has lifted his ball, does he still get a 9.4b penalty for lifting his ball? I think the answer to that is yes, and that's when we covered Rule 9. But he can correct the error and proceed on. Oh, he's still going to get the 1-stroke penalty. All right, number 2. When ball was put in play under a rule that applied, but ball was dropped or placed in the wrong place. In correcting the mistake, the player must go on to take relief under the same rule, but may use any relief option under that rule. So, and again, it's a very nice example. You're taking unplayable ball relief. You're going to use the lateral option under 19.2C, which is the 2 club lengths, and you mistakenly drop the ball outside. So in other words, you drop it 3 club lengths. What this is saying is you've proceeded under the right rule, so you got to continue under that rule, but you may correct it by using any option under that rule that applies. And then the bullet point, or not bullet point, but parent 3, when ball was put in play under rule that applies and was dropped or placed in the right place, but the rule requires the ball to be dropped or placed again. In correcting this mistake, the player must go on to take relief using the same rule and the same relief option. And there is an error in that next bullet point. Let me just tell you about the error and you can make the appropriate correction. They put the parent 1 and the parent 2 is in the wrong spot in that paragraph. It reads, for example, if when taking relief for an unplayable ball, the player used the lateral relief option, 19.2C, and the ball was, you have to delete that parent 1. So you just take that out of there and it says, was dropped in the right relief area, but, and that's where you insert parent number 1. Parent number 1 was dropped in the wrong way, see 14.3b, or, and after the word or, you insert parent number 2. All right, 14.
Is a good way to think of parent 2 and parent 3 under that rule obviously has something to do with the fact that in parent 2, the drop didn't count under 14.3b3 because a ball dropped in the wrong way does not count. And in parent 3, if you drop the ball correctly and then had to redrop it, that drop did count, so you wouldn't be able to change your relief option. Is that a good way to think of it?
Yes, the question, what Bill was saying is, what is the technique for remembering these 3 options? My way of remembering it is, under parent number 1, it's wrong rule. And if you dropped under the wrong rule, the way you correct it is you drop under any rule that applies. The second paragraph, you've dropped under the right rule, but you've dropped it in the wrong place. So the way you correct it then is you continue under that rule, and then you drop it in the right place. And then under any option. And the third is you have it under the right rule, you've dropped it in the right place, but as an example, it then rolled out of the relief area. What they're saying is you dropped under the right rule, so you continue under that rule. You've dropped in the right place, so you continue under that option, but you have to redrop it because 14.3C says you have to redrop it.
Option 1 there. Obviously, any stroke and distance option you take is not something that's mistaken rule. So if you drop the ball and put it in play under stroke and distance in 1, you are stuck with that.
Yeah, but that comes under 18.1, not this. So let's kind of save that for Rule 18.
We had a discussion that we're going to save a good question for a better day. Thank you. All right, 14.5C. No penalty for ball lifted to correct mistake. I would, in the heading there, insert the word accidental. So it should really read, no penalties for ball lifted to correct accidental mistake. You don't have to put it in there, but when you read what they're getting at, you'll see why I like the word accidental. When a ball is lifted under 14.5A to correct the mistake, the player does not count any penalty for an action that were taken relating to that ball after the mistake and before it was lifted, such as accidentally causing it to move. So an example of that is your ball is on the cart pad. You pick it up, you drop it 2 club lengths away. You're ready to take your stance. You take your stance, you put the club down right next to the ball moves. Now you're going to get a 1-stroke penalty under 9.4 because you caused your ball to move. What this is saying is there is no penalty as long as you then go on to correct it. So we're going to forget about that accidental mistake you made after you made your bigger mistake of dropping it in the wrong place. So in that situation, when the player then picks up his ball because his partner says you can't drop it 2 club lengths, he then avoids the penalty of playing the wrong place because he's going to correct it, and he avoids the Rule 9.4b penalty for accidentally causing his ball to move. And then there's an exception if the thing that you did was, say, move one of the conditions affecting the stroke in some fashion, and that's going to be the same for the new drop that you take, you're still going to get the penalty. So let me give an example. You drop your ball 2 club lengths outside, or 1 club length plus about 3 inches outside of where you're supposed to have dropped it. In other words, it's 3 inches too far. You're then about to take your stance and you push down the soil, you move sand under your feet to get a nice stance. Then someone says, wait a minute, you got to drop it 3 inches further into the relief area. You pick it up. If your stance is still on the same spot that it was before, what this is saying is you don't escape that penalty because under your new stance in the new dropping area, you have had a breach of Rule 8.1. Kind of clear, not so clear. All right, 14.6. Making stroke from where previous stroke made. Now notice this is the rule that we've referred to a number of times that I said you need to insert under the 6.2b teeing area rules and under 14.4, and perhaps we'll see why now. This rule applies whenever a player is required or allowed under the rules to make the next stroke from where the previous stroke was made. That is, when taking stroke and distance or playing again after a stroke that is canceled or otherwise does not count. How the player must play a ball in playing depends on the area where the previous stroke was made. In all of these situations, the player may either use the original ball or another ball. So let me give an example here. Playing again under stroke and distance. We all know that one. You hit your ball from the teeing area, you hit it out of bounds, you go back to the teeing area. This is covered. But also this covers a situation where you're playing again after a stroke has been canceled. So an example of that is if you're in match play and the stroke is canceled by the opponent because you played in the wrong order, you are then required to make your next stroke from where your previous stroke was made. Another example, and I think John covered this under Rule 11, if you are on the putting green and you putt and your ball hits a mouse that crosses the putting green, you don't cancel the stroke, but the stroke does not count. And what does that rule say? You must make your next stroke from where your previous stroke was made. So that's what we're talking about. Making next stroke from where previous stroke was made. Previous stroke made from teeing area, you go back to the teeing area, you apply the teeing area rules. Stroke made from the general area, penalty area, or bunker, you're going to have a relief area. We're going to look at the diagram in just a minute. And a previous stroke made from the putting green, you're going to place it. You don't drop it if you're making the stroke again from the putting green. So an example of that is you putt from the putting green, the ball hits a mouse, you then play again from the putting green, you place it on the spot. So when your ball hits the mouse and you have to replace it, can you substitute balls? Yes. Sounds strange, but you can. All right, so let's look at the diagram, 14.6. Making next stroke where previous stroke is made. So from the teeing area, you hit that ball, maybe you hit it out of bounds. Panel 1. So what do? You simply go back to the teeing area and you make the next stroke, and it must be played from anywhere in the teeing area. It doesn't say that you have to drop it. It doesn't say you have to place it. It doesn't say anything else. It says you got to play it from the teeing area. So as you're going back, if you just throw the ball in the teeing area, is the ball in play? No. Can you move it? Yes, because the teeing area rules say yes. Can you tee it? Yes. Can you put it on the ground? Yes. It's only in play once you play it, once you hit it, once you make a stroke. Second panel, ball played from general area, bunker, or penalty area. So again, assuming that you hit it out of bounds in the second panel here, what do? You have to make your next stroke from where your previous stroke was made. And this is a change from the old rules and a good change. It says that you then go back to where your previous stroke was made. That's your reference point. And then technically the reference point is the spot where the previous stroke was made, and then you're going to get one club length no nearer the hole. And notice under this situation, you can actually have a situation if your ball was in the rough but close to the fairway and you hit it out of bounds, you could go back and you're going to get one club length, which may actually allow you to drop the ball in the fairway. Why? Because the only requirement is that you drop it in the same area of the course. Fairway and rough is all the general area. And so you have complied with the rule by dropping it in the general area. Notice that if you hit your ball from the bunker and you hit it out of bounds, you then make your next stroke from where your previous stroke. The requirement is that you drop it in the bunker. Why? Because you have to drop it in the same area of the course. And if you played it from the bunker, you got to drop it in the bunker. And then the third panel shows the putting green, the player, and you say, how could this ever come up? Well, it was a number of years ago at Augusta on the 13th hole. Maybe it was the 15th. Anyway, it was the 13th to the 15th. Tiger Woods putted his ball off the green and into the penalty area. It was called the lateral water hazard at that time. But what did Tiger do? He then placed the ball from where his previous stroke was made. And this, of course, gives me an opportunity to talk about the 13th at Oconomowoc. If your ball is on the very front of that green and you are putting towards the pin that is that's the hole location is right by the front, and you're 5 feet away and you putt and that ball goes all the way down the hill, you don't have to play it from the bottom of the hill. You can, but you can play it again from where your next stroke is made. You can go and then you would then place it where it was played from under stroke and distance.
We used to have that rule for shave number 4 because they would shave the front of the par 3 and the green tilts down towards the bottom of the hill. Yeah. And if you putted it off the green, you'd be 80 yards away.
Yeah. The other hole that usually comes up in this discussion is Butamore. What hole is that, Bill? The sixth hole at Butamore. I like the 13th at Oconomowoc because that's a great hole. All right. 14-7.
One thing I'd say about 14.6 is the only difference from the old rule to the new rule is 14.6b. The general area, penalty area, or bunker, you now get the club length. But the teeing area and the putting green are the same as what they used to be.
All right. The comment under 14.6 was the change from the old rules to the new rules really affects only the middle panel on diagram 14.6, because now under the new rules, you actually get one club length, whereas under the old rules, you were required to drop it, quote, as near as possible. Now you get one club length. All right, 14.7, playing from wrong place. 14.7a, place from where a ball must be played. Doesn't come as a surprise. After starting a hole, a player must make each stroke from where his or her ball came to rest, except when the rule requires or allows the ball to be played from another place. player must not play his or her ball in play from a wrong place. The penalty is, it's the general penalty every time you play from the wrong place. Notice that this is a rule that you can get more than one general penalty if you continue to play from the wrong place. So if your ball is in a no play zone and you make a stroke at it and you advance it a foot, and then you make another stroke at it still in the no play zone, you get another 2-stroke penalty. And if you do the same thing, you get another 2-stroke penalty. Every time you play from a wrong place, you're going to get the general penalty. Obviously, in match play, the first time you do it, you're done with the hole because it's the general penalty. How to complete hole after playing from wrong place in stroke play. Player must decide whether to play out the hole with ball played from the wrong place or to correct the mistake by playing from the right place. What a player does next depends on whether it was a serious breach. Remember, we've had this discussion when we went through the definition of a serious breach. If it's not a serious breach, the player must play out the hole with the ball played from the wrong place without correcting his mistake. So, your ball is on a cart path, you drop it 2 club lengths out, you hit your ball, you're done. You got a 2-stroke penalty from playing from a wrong place, and you just continue. You don't go back and correct it. You just play out the hole. It's a non-serious breach. You played it 1 club length from where you should have played it. Bullet point 2, excuse me, serious breach. The player must correct the mistake by playing out the hole with the ball played from the right place under the rules. If the player does not correct the mistake before making a stroke to begin another hole, or for the final hole before returning his or her scorecard, the player is disqualified. This is the 4th must correct under the rules. We've seen the first one was failure to hole out. Second one was playing outside the teeing area in stroke play. The third one was playing a wrong ball. This is the 4th one. If you make a serious breach of playing from the wrong place, you have to correct. If you don't correct, you're disqualified. If you're uncertain of what to do, the player should, notice the word should is a recommendation. It is not a penalty if you don't do it. It's saying you should play out the hole with both balls played from the wrong place and a second ball played from the right place. Why should you do that? Because you want to protect yourself. If you don't play it with 2 balls and the committee decides it's a serious breach, you're done. That's why you want to play 2 balls. Player who tries to correct mistake must report to committee. This is a slight change under the rules. Anytime you are attempting to correct a mistake from playing from a wrong place, you must report to the committee. And if you fail to do so, you're going to be disqualified. All right, parent 3. When player tries to correct mistake, committee will decide player's score for the hole. Player's score for the hole depends on whether the committee decides there was a serious breach in playing the original ball from the wrong place. So if there's no serious breach, the score played from the wrong place counts, and the player gets the general penalty, which means 2 strokes. So in other words, if you're not sure, you dropped it 3 club lengths, you're only supposed to have dropped it 2 club lengths. You say, well, I don't know if that's or maybe you drop it 2 and you're supposed to drop it 1. You're not sure, you play 2 balls. This is not a serious breach with that first ball, so you're going to count the first ball, but you are going to get a penalty of 2 strokes for playing from the wrong place. Now, let's assume that it is a serious breach. So we're saying that now the first ball that you've played is a serious breach. The score with the ball played to correct the mistake of playing from the wrong place counts, and the player gets the general penalty under 14.7a, which means 2 strokes are added to the player's score. So you have a serious breach for the first ball. You then go back and you correct it before you've played from the next teeing area. That second ball then played is your score for the hole. You simply add 2 penalty strokes. The stroke made in playing the original ball from the wrong place, and any more strokes with that ball, solely from playing that ball, do not count. So this comes up on the exams, national exams all the time. If you play from a wrong place and it is a serious breach, you do not count that stroke. So if they say, how many strokes did you get in playing this hole, you ignore the fact that you played from a wrong place, serious breach. You just count all the other strokes with the other ball, and when you get done, you add 2 penalty strokes because you played from a wrong place. You don't count a total of 3. In other words, you don't count the fact that you actually played a stroke with the wrong ball. That stroke, I'm sorry, the wrong place. That stroke is ignored. If the ball played to correct the mistake is also played from a wrong place, then you're going to get 2 with the original, 2 with the second, and the second ball is going to count. So you're going to get a total of 4. If both of them are wrong place and both are serious breach, you're done for the day. You go and, as Bill likes to say, you're down to the Dairy Queen. Is that right? Is that what you always say, Bill?
Even if you like Culver.
Even if you like Culver's, you go to the Dairy Queen. All right, that's 14. Any questions on 14?
I think I kind of understand the gentleman's question about how does Rule 14.2e apply to the model local rule. And one would be, if I hit a ball on your favorite hole 13 and it embedded a foot in front of the green, and now I drop, and taking relief from an embedded ball, and it rolls away, and now I drop again, and now I'm required to place. And the ball won't come to rest, which is Rule 14.2e. I have to find the nearest spot. And then the ball will be placed at rest. But what if my ball came to rest, let's say in that same spot, wasn't embedded, and was against a leaf, and I'm going to prefer my lie, and it won't come to rest in my 1 club length relief area? I think then you would proceed under 14.2e and you'd place it in the nearest spot where it would come to rest.
A little discussion. I don't know if the people online heard that, but sort of the bottom line is if you have a ball that you are, for whatever reason, placing back on the course, and that ball does not stay on the spot that you place it, you're always going to default to 14.2e. And the reason is because you got to have a ball on the course. You can't just say, well, it won't come to rest, I'm going home. And so you have to follow 14.2e, which means you stay in the same area of the course, and you can move, surprisingly, you could move 10 yards, 20 yards, if need be, to get the ball to remain at rest. It's not you have to get it to stay within 1 club lane. The point is you have to get it to stay on the course. So you got to find a spot as near as where you are for which it will stay at rest. So take Oconomowoc, if you were right in the center of the fairway, 5 feet short of that green, where is that ball going to stay at rest? Probably you're going to have to go to one of the sides, which in that fairway could be 10, 15 yards before you got grass that was tall enough, i.e. rough, for that ball to stay at rest. And then you would actually place it, in the rough, because that is the nearest spot where it will come to rest.
Something I noticed my first year was in the drop play scenario, a lot of people trying to drop the ball in the very front of the relief area so they will bounce out, and then they get to place it. Am I dreaming, or is that a technique that players are trying to use with the relief area?
You're using the rules to your advantage. That's, if you drop it in the right place in the right way, you're fine. You can't read into.
The question posed was, can a player strategically drop his or her ball anywhere in a relief area, hoping that the ball will then roll outside the relief area, hoping that it will happen a second time so that they can then place the ball? The answer is yes, that is a strategy that you can use. You are not required to drop in the middle of the relief area. You can drop anywhere within the relief area that you want, and then if it doesn't come to rest, you drop it again, and then you're going to place it. And this is 14.3C2. Bill, do you want to continue with 15, or do you want to take a break?
Pretty short.
Yeah, let's do 15. It's not that long.
All right, we're going to go on to 15. 15 and 16 are the, quote, free relief rules. There is a difference between them, and basically it involves the question of whether you move the ball or you move the object. Rule 15, what you're taking relief from are those objects that are movable. And there's two things that are movable: loose impediments and movable obstructions. And when you have interference, when we go through 15, you're not going to move the ball, you're going to move the objects. When we get to 16, we're going to see that all of those objects cannot be moved. Therefore, if you're going to allow the player to take relief, you got to let the player take relief by picking up the ball and dropping it from a different place. So that's the difference between 15 and 16. Let's look at a couple of definitions in Rule 15. Okay, first one is loose impediments, page 209. Loose impediments. Any unattached natural objects, I think most of us know this, but they have to be natural objects. If they're not natural, then they're not loose impediments. Stones, loose gravel, leaves, branches, sticks, dead animals, animal waste, worms, insects, similar animals that can be easily removed. And here's the key: and the mounds or webs they build, such as worm casts, ant hills, or spider webs. And spider webs, as we'll see at the bottom of this definition, is specifically called out as a special case. And the reason it's called out is because a spider web is attached to a tree, generally speaking, but it's still considered a, quote, loose impediment. Why? Because the definition says so. That's the simple reason for that. Such natural objects are not loose if they are attached or growing, solidly embedded, or sticking to the ball. And then we have the special cases. Sand and loose soil are not loose impediments. This is a change in definition from the old rules, but it's not a change in outcome. The old rules said sand and loose soil were loose impediments on the putting green, but not elsewhere. Now they simply say sand and loose soil are not loose impediments. However, when we went over Rule 13.1c, we can see that you can move sand and loose soil from the putting green. Dew, frost, and water are not loose impediments, so you can't remove them. However, we have the special teeing area rules, so if you're in the teeing area, even though they are not loose impediments, we have a special rule that says you can move them. Snow and natural ice, other than frost, either loose impediments or when on the ground, temporary water. And then spider webs are loose impediments. Movable obstructions. 210, bottom of 210. An obstruction that can be moved with reasonable effort and without damaging the obstruction or the course. And this is, the next paragraph is a change. If part of an immovable obstruction or integral object, such as a gate, door, or part of an attached cable, meets these two standards, that part is treated as a movable obstruction. So this is a situation if you had to hit through a clubhouse or whatever, and there was a door that when closed did not interfere with your swing, but when you got there, the door was open. Can you take relief from the immovable obstruction? And the answer is no. that's not a movable obstruction. If you then can close the door to the building, that part is movable. And what they're saying is, then that's a movable obstruction, and you've got to take movable obstruction relief, meaning Rule 15. You cannot take immovable obstruction, which would be Rule 16. Obstruction. Next page. Any artificial object except for integral objects and boundary objects. This again is a change in definition under the old rules, but not really a change in outcome. Any artificial object except integral objects, boundary objects, and I would add the following, and paint dots or lines. I'm not sure why they didn't put that in the rule, rather they instead decided to put it into interpretation. But if you are on a line on the course, is that line artificial? Yes, of course, it's paint. That's artificial. But what this is saying is it's not an obstruction. So you're not going to get relief just because the ball is on a paint. If a object is 3 feet out of bounds, is that thing, that physical object, still an obstruction? And the answer is yes. Under the old rules, they excluded it from the definition of obstruction. But again, this is a definitional change. It's not an outcome change. When we get to Rule 16, we'll see that in order to get relief from an obstruction, the relief and the ball have to be on the course. And then there's a whole list of items that are considered obstructions. You look at the very bottom, it says an obstruction is either movable obstruction or an immovable, and this repeats it, but if part of the immovable obstruction, such as a gate, door, or part of an attached cable, meets the definition of the movable obstruction, that part is treated as a movable obstruction. One thing that often comes up, if you have a brick wall that is, the structure of it is, it's a pile of stones, big stones, one on top of another. In theory, if the stone's not too big, you could lift the stone off and put it down. That is not a, quote, movable obstruction, even though it is, quote, movable, because that stone was intended to be part of the wall that does not move. Contrast that with a wall that has a gate. And when that gate swings open and closed, that gate is intended to be moved. So in that situation, the gate itself is a movable obstruction. All right, let's look at Rule 15. Fairly short rule, and it covers movable, loose impediments and movable obstructions. This is the old Rule 23, the old Rule 24.1, and the old Rule 22, which is ball interfering with or helping with play. Purpose. Rule 15 covers when and how the player may take free relief from loose impediments and movable obstructions. So that's all 15 covers, is movable, loose impediments and movable obstructions. These movable, natural, or artificial objects are not treated as part of the challenge of playing the course, and the player is normally allowed to remove them when they interfere with play. But the player needs to be careful in moving loose impediments near his or her ball off the putting green, because there will be a penalty if moved when causing the ball to move. Notice that it says off the putting green, because on the putting green, any accidental movement of the ball in the putting green is covered by Rule 13. That's the special rule, no penalty. 15.1a, removal of loose impediments. Without penalty, a player may remove a loose impediment anywhere on or off the course, and may do so in any way, such as by using hand or foot. So notice the broad terms, anywhere on or off, and may do it in any way. And you can do that by getting help from others. If it's a large branch that's fallen from a tree and you're not physically able to do it, you can get help from somebody else to move that. Exception 1, removing loose impediments where ball must be replaced. Before replacing a ball that was lifted or moved from anywhere, except the putting green, a player must not deliberately remove a loose impediment that, if moved when the ball was at rest, would have likely to have caused the ball to move. If he does so, we're going to get one penalty. This is a fairly narrow rule because it talks about the situation of replacing a ball. And it only has to do with replacing a ball. And here's the way I think about this rule. And take a situation, assuming you're playing Augusta National, you're on the 15th hole, or it's the 13th hole, and you want to hit a little draw around the corner. You don't get it quite far enough, and now your ball is on the pine straw. And it's laying there nice gently on top of that pine straw. Assume now a spectator is not very careful and he kicks the ball. So what are you required to do? You're required to replace your ball. Where do you replace a ball? On the spot. What this is saying is you cannot move the pine straw if the ball had been there and you had moved the pine straw, the ball would have moved. So what this is saying is you have to place it gently on top of that pine straw. You don't get the advantage of moving the loose impediments because you are replacing the ball, which means to put the ball back on the spot. Contrast that with the situation on the 15th hole when you hit your ball to the pine straw, and when you get there, you are standing on a sprinkler head. So what do? Do you get relief from the sprinkler head? Yes, we're going to go over that. And what are you going to do? You're going to find your nearest point of relief. You're then going to drop the ball. You are no longer replacing. So this exception does not apply. Can you remove loose impediments from the area in which you're going to drop your ball? Yes. And remember when we covered 8.1a, loose impediments and movable obstructions are not part of 8.1a. So you could move the pine straw and then be able to place the ball. You then drop the ball in the relief area. Exception 2, restrictions on deliberately moving loose impediments to affect ball in motion. And it says C11.3. John covered that last time. And as a reminder, anytime you see a rule that says sort of see such and such, you always want to see that specific rule, because generally speaking, that is the specific rule, and this one would be the general rule. And again, we see this all the time with a reference that says see Rule 14.2d. All right.
And that would imply that that rule supersedes the other rule.
Yeah, the question was, why do we need to look at the specific rule? And the answer is because the specific is going to override the general. And we saw that last week with rule, I hate to bring it up, but 9.3, we had that situation where it said C14, whatever it was. I don't want to get sidetracked. Well, as long as I mentioned it, we had that come up last week under 9.3. It was the exception, and it says ball on putting green must be replaced if moved after have already been lifted. And it suggests that if it's only lifted by the player, but not an opponent, and then someone called in and says, well, does this apply to an opponent? And the correct answer is you have to look at the specific rule. 9.3 exception is the general rule. The specific rule is 13.1b. When you look at that specific rule, that overrides the general. And when you look at the specific rule, it specifically allows a player or an opponent to be covered by this. All right. Slight diversion there. All right, 15.1b. Ball moved when removing loose impediment. If a player's removal of a loose impediment causes his or her ball to move, the ball must be replaced on its original spot. And again, there's the reference to 14.2. And if the moved ball has been at rest anywhere except the putting green or in the teeing area, or when you're searching for it, or if you're searching for it, you're not going to get the penalty. So an example of that, again, if your ball is in the middle of the fairway, directly on top of a leaf, and you lift that ball for, say, identification, you lift because it may be cut or cracked. 15.1a, the exception says you can't remove that loose impediment before you replace it. All right, movable obstructions.
I have a question. Someone asked last week, and I was saving it for this week, and the person is definitely online, so I want to address this. Let's say a large leaf is by a hole, and you and I are playing a match, and there's a large leaf 6 inches from the hole, and I'm chipping from the front of the green, and I want to leave the leaf in place to help serve as a backstop.
Right.
Prior to me playing, and not while the ball is in motion, you have a right to pick up that leaf.
But you have a right to have the leaf remain there.
Right.
And if you say, I want that leaf there, and I deliberately pick it up, I'm going to get a penalty and perhaps even a disqualification.
Under the 11.3, right? Well, it wouldn't even be that. It would be my rights or whatever. You've affected my rights.
You can't just say something like that. There will be a penalty.
The question is, if Bill is chipping and he's playing a match against me, and Bill sees a leaf right by the hole that he wants there, can Bill tell me, Dan, do not pick up that leaf. I want that to remain there. And the answer is yes, Bill has that right. If I then go and deliberately pick it up, I'm trying to think of what the rule is, but I'm going to get a penalty for interfering with Bill's right to have that leaf there. If I do pick it up and Bill had instructed me to leave it there, whatever penalty I get, Bill will nevertheless have the right to put the leaf back in the condition that it was in before it was moved by me.
There wasn't. And, you know, this is a very technical point about this. Or is there?
I'm sure there is. I'll try and find it.
Okay.
There is, I believe there's an interpretation of that exact scenario.
Okay. While people are diligently looking through their official guide, we're going to move on to 15.2. This rule covers free relief that is allowed from artificial objects that meet the definition of movable obstruction. It does not give relief from immovable obstruction, a different type of free relief which is allowed under Rule 16, and it does not give relief from boundary objects or integral objects for which no relief is allowed. And as a reminder, integral objects are those objects that the committee has said are integral to the course and you don't get free relief. An example is when we play Washington County. The rock, I think it's between the 6th hole and maybe the 7th or 8th hole. There is a rock wall that normally when we play there, the committee treats that as a integral part of the course. So you would not get free relief. All right, 15.2a, relief from movable obstruction. Without penalty, a player may remove a movable obstruction anywhere on or off the course and may do so in any way. Again, that concept, you can do it in any way. But there are two exceptions. Tee markers must not be moved when ball will be played from teeing area. And again, that's the general statement, but you can't take that literally because it tells you to look to 16.2b4 and 8.1a1. So you want to read those for the specific rule. And exception 2, restrictions on deliberately removing movable obstruction to affect a ball in motion, and that's 11.3. If a player ball moves while he or she is removing a movable obstruction, there's no penalty and the ball must be replaced on its original spot, which is not known, must be estimated. So the diagram 15.2a, your ball is up against a rake. You then pick up the rake in the second panel and the ball moves. you simply replace it. Question you often get is, are you required to mark the ball? The answer to that is no. However, it is good practice to do so because you're required to get the ball back in the spot. And how are you going to get the ball back in the spot unless you mark it? But you are not technically required to mark it. If it moves, you just put it back. Relief when ball is in or on movable obstruction anywhere on course except on the putting green. And then we're going to talk about the putting green. The player may take free relief by lifting the ball, removing the movable obstruction, and dropping the ball or another ball in the relief area. All right, so if you look at 15.2a, the ball is laying on a towel, it looks like in the middle of the fairway. Sort of the question you may want to ask yourself is, why aren't you just going to replace your ball? Why are you going to drop it? And the answer is because the ball is not on the course. The ball is on the towel. So you're going to remove the ball, you're going to remove the towel. You're then going to have a relief area, because if you drop the ball, you're always going to have a relief area. You're going to get one club length, no near the hole, and then you're going to drop the ball. Notice again that if your ball is on a towel in the rough, 1 foot from the fairway, this may allow you to actually get the ball dropped in the fairway, because there's no distinction when you're talking general area between the rough and the fairway. Okay, so again, under 15.2a, when that ball is on the towel, you're not going to drop directly under. Is there any need to mark the spot of the ball? No. It's pretty hard to mark it because you're going to move the towel in any event. Okay, parent 3. Relief when ball is in or on movable obstruction on putting green. The player may free relief by lifting the ball and removing the movable obstruction, and then, and this is the difference, placing the original ball or another ball on the estimated spot right under where the ball was at rest, in or on the movable obstruction. So on the putting green, you're going to place the ball. You're not going to drop it. Relief for ball not found in or on movable obstruction. This always comes up on the national exam. If a player's ball has not been found and it's known or virtually certain that it came to rest in or on a movable obstruction, the player may use this relief option instead of taking stroke and distance. So what's an example of a ball not found but in or on a movable obstruction? An example would be sort of a large waste bin. Maybe think of a 55-gallon drum that they're using for garbage, and your ball goes in that, and it's in this pile of garbage. What this rule is saying is you are not required to tip the bucket over and find your ball. If it's known or virtually certain that it is in that movable obstruction, then you can take the relief under 15.2b. And we're going to talk about this when we get to Rule 16, but since you don't know where the ball is, you have to first find a reference point from which you're going to take your relief. And that is going to be where it last crossed the edge of the movable obstruction. Why? Because you don't know whether it's on the right side of the bucket or the left side of the bucket, so it's where it last crossed the edge. That's your reference point. And then you put the ball into play under 15.a2. Once the player puts another ball into play to take relief in this way, the original ball is no longer in play. And this is true even if it is found on the course before the end of the 3-minute search. And then the caveat, which we all know about, you can only take if it's known or virtually certain that the ball is in the garbage bucket. You can't just say, well, I think it's in there. It must be known or virtually certain, which is a 95% probability. All right, 15.3. Ball or ball marker helping or interfering with play. The terminology has changed a little bit from the old rules. It used to say assisting, now they use the word helping. 15.3a applies only to a ball at rest on the putting green. So if you look at this rule, 15.3a deals with helping. And the only time we're concerned with helping is if the ball is on the putting green. So if the ball is on the fringe, it's not on the putting green, and we don't care whether it helps or not, this rule isn't going to apply. When we get to interference, it can be anywhere on the course, but helping, the ball has to be on the putting green. If a player reasonably believes that the ball on the putting green might help anyone's play, such as by serving as a possible backstop near the hole, the player may mark the spot of the ball and lift it under 13.1b, or belong to somebody else, require. The word require is mandatory. When somebody requires you to do something, you are obligated to do it, and if you don't, there will be an appropriate penalty for your failure to do so. The lifted ball must be replaced on its original spot. All right, in stroke play only, and this is obviously it does not apply to match play. A player who is required to lift the ball may play first instead. Secondly, if two or more players agree to leave a ball in place to help any player, and that player then makes a stroke with the helping ball left in place, each player who made the agreement gets the general penalty. This is a penalty that applies whether you know this is a breach of the rules or not. If you know that it is a breach of the rules, then you have two players that have agreed to breach the rules, and they're both going to be disqualified. So this applies only if you have two players that agree in stroke play to leave the ball in play, and they do not know that that's a breach of the rules. (15.3b). Ball anywhere on the course interfering with play. Meaning of interference by another player's ball. Interference under this rule exists when another player's ball might interfere with the player's of intended stance or area of swing, is on or close to the player's line of play, such that given the intended stroke, there's a reasonable chance the player's ball in motion could hit it, or, and this is the catch-all, is close enough to distract the player in making the stroke. We're going to see that's subject to the reasonableness standard. But if your ball is in the middle of the fairway and there's a ball 2 feet to the right, you can request that someone else mark and lift that ball if you have a reasonable belief that it would distract the player in making the stroke. And the other player has to do it. We're going to see there's a penalty if you don't. When relief is allowed from interfering a ball. If a player reasonably believes that another player's ball anywhere on the course might interfere, then we're going to go through these points, but that's the word reasonable. So if you are on the left side of the fairway and you see a ball 30 yards away on the right side of the fairway and you say, could you please mark that ball? I find that to be distracting. That probably would not be a reasonable belief that there's interference. Bill's laughing. I think you mean that you agree with me on that?
No, I was just thinking, we had a player in a best ball once, had a 150-yard shot into the green, and his opponent's ball was 20 feet from the hole, short of the hole location, and the player 150 yards away asked the guy to mark the ball. Just made me realize where I would point to with the right, Phil Mickelson at Torrey Pines. Go ahead.
All right, so we're under 15.3b parent 2. When relief is allowed, player reasonably believes the player may require the other player to mark the spot and lift the ball, and the ball must not be cleaned except when lifted from the putting green. If the other player does not mark the ball before lifting the ball or cleans the lifted ball when not allowed, he or she gets a 1-stroke penalty. And in stroke play only, a player required to lift a his or her ball under the rule may play first. A player is not allowed to lift his or her ball under this rule based only on the player's own belief that a ball might interfere with another player's play. This is, again, something that always comes up on the national exam. And the reason that what you have to think about is you can't assume that another ball will interfere with someone else's play. That is the other person's call to make. So if my ball is in the middle of the fairway and then Bill hits his ball 6 inches behind mine, so I outdrove Bill by 6 inches, I cannot go up there and mark my ball under the assumption that Bill is going to think that it interferes with his play. I have to wait until Bill requests that I do it or asks me to do it because he thinks it interferes with his play. And of course, if it's in the fairway, there is no such thing as helping because helping only applies if you're on the putting green. Ball marker helping or interfering with play. This is 15.3c. And we're going to go through this, but basically, a ball marker is treated the same as the ball. And it's just like we did when we went under, was it rule 9.7. All right. If a ball marker might help or interfere with play, a player may move the ball marker out of the way if it's his own, or if the ball marker belongs to another player, require the player to move the ball marker out of the way for the same reasons as he or she might require under 15.3a or 15.3b. So what they're saying is we're going to treat the ball marker as if it were a ball for deciding whether the ball marker helps or interferes with play. And it says the ball marker must be moved out of the way to a new spot. Either the lifted ball or must be replaced on the original spot, or the ball marker must be replaced to mark the spot. That's the same thing we had under 9.7. This is a slight easing of the rules because if you move the ball marker, what this is saying is you can either put the ball marker back or you can simply put the ball back without having put the ball marker back. But in either case, your goal is to get the ball in the place that it was in. But we're not going to require you to actually go through the mechanical process of first moving the ball marker and then putting the ball behind it. However, it is good practice to do that because that is the best way to ensure that the ball gets back in the spot. Once the player, once the player puts the penalty. This penalty also applies if the player makes a stroke without waiting for a helping ball or ball marker to be lifted, after he becomes aware that another player intended to lift or move it. So an example would be the ball is in a position to help on the putting green, and I know that Bill wants that ball lifted, and I become aware that he's kind of walking towards it or he says something to me. I then have to wait and allow him to mark that ball or request me to mark it. And if I don't, I get the 2-stroke penalty. And then if Bill asks me to mark the ball and I say, no, I'm not going to do it, I then get a 2-stroke penalty. Questions on 15?
Yeah, I had a question about the movable obstruction, like in a immovable obstruction. Suppose you have a fence that's marking out of bounds. So you don't get relief from that fence. But if there's a gate on there, and say the gate is closed, and you're on the golf course, your ball is, but your backswing is interfered by that gate, can you move that gate? Or if it's open, I mean, like you said, if the door is open or closed or whatever, you can't move it closed or open. So could you address that just a little bit?
The question involves a ball that is near or up against a boundary fence, and there is a gate that is such that the gate can be opened and closed, do you or do you not get relief from that? The answer is you have to look at the definition of boundary object. A boundary object include the boundary fence, but does not include a gate. How do we know that it doesn't include a gate? Because there is a rules interpretation called boundary object /2, which is status of gate attached to boundary object. And it says a gate for getting through a boundary wall or fence is not part of the boundary object. Such a gate is an obstruction unless the committee chooses to define it as an integral object. So what does that mean? That means if your ball is up against the gate, that gate is not part of the boundary object. It is a, quote, obstruction. What kind of obstruction is a gate? Movable or immovable? Movable. So does that mean that you can move the gate? And the answer is yes. Can you say, well, I don't want to move the gate. I want to lift my ball and drop it, and I'm going to do so. Can you do that? All right. The question was, can you do it without penalty? Bill has suggested you could always do something under the unplayable ball rule. The reason that you can't do it without penalty is because under the definition of obstruction and movable obstruction, it says if you have an immovable obstruction, some part of which is a movable obstruction, that part is treated as a movable obstruction, meaning you do not get relief under Rule 16 by moving the ball. You only get relief under Rule 15 by moving the object. So you could move the gate to play the shot.
It would be a classic case where you would include it as part of the integral object. And so that it's consistent. The
comment was, could the committee treat that gate as part of the as part of the boundary object? And Bill said that if he was in charge of the committee, that would most likely be his preference. And the reason is so that the boundary object is treated consistently and the person does not gratuitously get the benefit of a gate.
If the committee overlooked it, it would be a movable obstruction, but like you said, you would not be moving the ball.
Bill commented that if a committee should overlook it, of course, that would not apply to the WSGA committee people, such as Bill, Jeff, or Thomas. They would never overlook such a thing.
But it's open. Are you supposed to close it before you play?
I don't think you could do it. Anything.
Leave it as is, whatever it is. Don't touch it. If it's open.
Well, a gate, we're talking about two different things. We originally were talking about a boundary object. A gate is not, by definition, a gate is not part of a boundary object. A gate would be part of an integral object, and the committee would then need to decide whether they want that to be whatever special rule they wanted on the gate.
I think you said you can say that even if it's movable, you make it an immovable obstruction. But if you declare it an integral object, I'm not sure that you can move the gate.
I think a movable part of an obstruction or an integral object is still considered movable.
Movable.
I think
it was in the definition when we were reading it. So there's a case where you just quickly go back. If part of them.
The question. If you look under the definition of movable obstruction, it says if part of an immovable obstruction or an integral object, such as a gate, meets these two definitions, that part is treated as movable obstruction. For those who didn't catch that, that kudos goes to Doug Fry for catching that point. Yes, John.
Does the paragraph right above 15.3C apply to 15.3C?
What's right above it? The one that says if
a player lifts his or her ball when not required to do so, the player gets a 1-stroke penalty.
Yes, because the point is, you can't, if you've marked the ball and you now,
you move the ball marker without being required.
yes,
You're still it's as if you move the ball would be the same.
yes. And that's, what I was getting by that is effectively you're getting a Rule 9.4B penalty for lifting your ball under no rule that applies. And that was the 9.7 rule on ball markers, and that would apply. Okay.
Let's see. 10:25.
All right, so we will return at 10:25.
He's going to unmute you right now, so you can start. I'll try to find that question real quick.
Should we start?
Yes.
Okay.
Thomas, unmute.
The rules you have to carry. The rules that come up most often.
Okay, can we get started again, please?
I'm gonna apologize to you because
Can you, let's get started and maybe we can shut the door, not necessarily on John, but. All right, let's look at the definitions for Rule 16. The first one, first definition is abnormal course condition, top of 200. Any of these four defined conditions are abnormal course conditions: animal hole, ground under repair, immovable obstruction, or temporary water. The only one that is new for this year, or for 2019, is really a movable obstruction, and it has now been put into the abnormal course condition rules so that you can take relief in the same way from these four abnormal course conditions. And as a reminder, these are definitions. Their definition does not change just because one of these four things is off of the course. So if you are standing in a puddle of water that is just outside the out of bounds line, that puddle of water is considered temporary water. So the definition is changed, but the outcome is not changed. You will not get relief from that because in order to get relief from an abnormal course condition, the ball and the abnormal course condition have to be on the course. Second one is animal. Any living member of the animal kingdom other than humans. For the period, if it's an animal, it's anything other than a human. That's all you got to know on that one. Animal hole. You would think that an animal hole is any hole dug by an animal, but that would be incorrect. And here's why. Any hole dug in the ground by an animal, except for holes dug by animals that are also defined as loose impediments, such as worms or insects. So if the hole is dug by a worm or an insect, it is not an animal hole, even though it is a hole dug by an animal, because this is a defined term. The term animal hole includes the loose material the animal dug out of the hole, any worn down track or trail leading into the hole, and any area on the ground pushed up or altered as a result of the animal digging the hole on the ground. So let's take this situation. Your ball is on the fringe, and right in front of you, as you want to putt from the fringe, are three different things. The first is loose soil and sand. Do you get relief? Your ball, the loose sand and soil is on the fringe. And the answer is no. Now, instead of loose sand or soil, let's assume that it is an anthill. And an anthill is not only the hole in the center, but the 1 inch or so cast, loose soil, whatever you want to call it, just outside. Do you get relief from that? Yes, but it depends on what kind of relief you're going to get, because that is a loose impediment. So what do you do in that situation? You brush the stuff away. You don't get to move the ball. Why? Because we're under Rule 15. Now, if that thing in front of you is a gopher hole or a mole hole, and the cast of it is on your line, you get relief from that, and the answer is yes. But in that situation, you're going to be under Rule 16 because that is an animal hole, abnormal course condition. So you have those three different things. The first one, you get no relief. The second one, you relief for an anthill as you move the anthill. The third one is your relief from an abnormal course condition, such as an animal hole, is you then going to get to move the ball under Rule 16, and we're going to see how to do that. All right, next definition is embedded. And notice that this is a definition that only has meaning when you're talking about Rule 16.3. It has no other meaning under the rules of golf. When a player's ball is in its own pitch mark made as a result of the player's previous stroke and where part of the ball is below the level of the ground, that's what an embedded ball is. So if you are walking down the fairway and you step on your ball, that ball is not embedded within the definition. Why? Because it's not the previous stroke. Similarly, if you're taking relief and you drop the ball and it goes under or partly into the ground, that ball did not embed, or it may embed, but it is not a, quote, embedded ball, because an embedded ball under the definition means it has to be in its own pitch mark made as a result of the player's previous stroke. Ground under repair, page 205. There are 4 things that can be ground under repair. Any part of the course the committee defines to be ground under repair, which is the first 2 bullet points, so about the first inch of that definition, all ground inside the edge, and any grass, bush, tree, growing such and such, including any part of those objects that extend above the ground outside the edge, but not when the object is attached to or below the ground. So what this is getting at is, in order to be under that ground under repair on the first inch or so of the definition, it has to be something that the committee has defined. If the committee has not defined it, there is no such thing as being under that first 2 bullet points. The second thing to know about ground under repair is your ball is in ground under repair if it's inside the edge, or if there is something growing in the ground under repair, such as a tree, that then extends outside the ground under repair. If your ball is in a tree that is growing in, but the ball is actually hanging outside, that ball is in the ground under repair. This is different than a penalty area, where in a penalty area, the line goes vertically up and down, and the ball would not be in the penalty area if it was in a tree hanging outside. All right, the next part of this definition is there are then 3 things that are automatically ground under repair even if the committee doesn't do anything. The first one is any hole made by the committee or the maintenance staff in setting up the course, such as a hole where a stake has been removed, or a double green being used by the player, or maintaining the course, such as a hole made in removing turf or tree stumps or something, but excluding aeration holes. So that says an aeration hole is not ground under repair. When we play in a WSGA events, we may have a local rule in effect that talks about what you do with aeration holes, but they are not ground under repair. So what would be an example of a hole made by the committee or the maintenance staff? The staff is out there and they dig a hole to check the sprinkler system. Well, that's a hole made by the committee in maintaining the course. Also, if a stake has been removed and the ball is in that, it's in a hole. The second type of automatic ground under repair is grass cuttings, leaves, and other materials piled for later removal. The key is they have to be piled for later removal. It's often hard to tell whether they're piled for later removal. Most grass clippings are not piled for later removal. Why? Because they're just spread all over, and they're obviously not. If the grass clippings are neatly in a pile, you may conclude that they are piled for removal if the course normally moves that stuff away. And the last type of objects that can be part of ground under repair are any animal habitat, such as a bird's nest, that is so near a player's ball that the player's stroke or stance might damage it. It doesn't damage the player, it might damage the bird's nest or animal habitat, except when the habitat has been made by animals that are defined as loose impediments, such as insects. So what does that mean? So if you have a bee's nest, is it or is it not ground under repair? And the answer is it is not. It is expressly excluded from the ground under repair. So you don't get relief from ground under repair. We will see, however, if that is a bee's nest, that may very well be considered a dangerous animal condition, and under Rule 16.2, you're going to get relief. This was an old rules decision. It's now part of the rules itself, which is a nice change. All right, immovable obstruction. Top of page 207. Any obstruction that cannot be moved without unreasonable effort or without damaging the obstruction or the course, otherwise does not meet the definition of movable obstruction. And here's the caveat: the committee may define any obstruction to be an immovable obstruction, even if it meets the definition of movable obstruction. So when we were talking about Rule 15, we were talking about integral objects, and what if you have a gate that's part of the integral object? That gate is a movable obstruction. Could the committee say, but you can't move it? Yes, but the committee has to say that in the notice to players or the terms of condition. Terms of the competition, sorry. Nearest point of complete relief. Slight change in the term. Notice that it says nearest point of complete relief. The old rule used to say nearest point of relief. It's the same concept. This terminology strikes me as better because it alerts the player that you have to have complete relief. Nearest point of complete relief is the reference point for taking relief from various things: abnormal course condition, dangerous animal, wrong putting green. It is the estimated point where the ball would lie that is, and the key there is nearest to the ball's position, but not near the hole. It must be in the required area and where the condition does not interfere with the stroke the player would have made from the original spot. These next two paragraphs are interesting. In doing this, you must estimate this reference point. In estimating this reference point, it requires the player to identify the choice of club, stance, swing, and line of play he would use for that stroke. So that means if you are on a cart path or you ball is on a cart path and you're right up by the putting green, and normally you would take a wedge for that shot, you are not permitted to take out your 3-wood and therefore arguably get further away from the cart path. You must simulate you're required to identify that choice. But then look at the next paragraph. It says the player does not need to actually simulate that stroke by taking the actual stance or swing. What that means is if you're up by the putting green and you would normally take a putter, that's the conditions under which you must take your relief. But you're not required to actually get out your wedge and then measure it. As long as you drop it within the area that you are required to drop it in, you do not actually have to measure it. The key is you have to get it in the required spot. The nearest point of complete relief relates solely to the particular condition from which relief is being taken and may be in a location where there is interference by something else. So if a player takes relief and then has interference by another condition from which a relief is allowed, the player may take relief again by determining the nearest point of complete relief. So an example of that is if your ball is in the middle of the fairway and you are standing in ground under repair, you take relief and then you move 4 feet away and you drop it, and the ball is dropped in a different area of ground under repair. That's a new situation. You have now taken relief from the first one, and now you have a new situation, and you can decide to play your ball as it lies, or you can take relief from that second abnormal course condition. Relief must be taken separately for each condition, except the player may take relief from both conditions at the same time when, having already taken relief separately, each condition, it becomes reasonable to conclude that continuing to do so will result in continued interference. What this says is if you have an embedded ball, as an example, in ground under repair, those are two different things. What this is saying is that you have to take relief separately, and you can take it from either one you want, and it's the player's choice. The player can often make a strategic decision on what to take first. So if your ball is embedded and it's in ground under repair, if you take relief from the embedded ball and then drop it, your ball may still be in ground under repair. And if you like the lie, you then get to play it. If you don't like the lie, you can then take relief from the ground under repair. There are 2 or 3 very nice interpretations. They're all in 16.1, 16.14, 16.4, 16.1/5 that goes through this situation of multiple taking relief and then taking them separately. The last point there is if your ball is on a cart path and you're standing in temporary water, and to take relief from the cart path, you drop it in temporary water, and then to take relief from the temporary water, you drop it on the cart path. You can't take relief from both of those until you've gone through that exercise first, where you dropped it and then dropped it a second time. And then if you conclude that it's reasonable to conclude that you're just going to continue this process, you can then take relief from both at the same time. No play zone. Page, it's right underneath it. A part of the course where the committee has prohibited play, a no play zone must be defined as part of either an abnormal course condition or a penalty area. In other words, that is the obligation of the committee. The committee cannot simply say this is a no play zone. The committee has the obligation to say it's a no play zone in an abnormal course condition, or it's a no play zone in a penalty area. And it may be used for various areas, and it gives a list of items there. Notice the second bullet point. It says you can use it to prevent damage to young trees, flower beds. In WSGA events, we have on our hard card, we have flower beds as no play zones, and they are defined as flower beds which are not in a penalty area, are no play zones in abnormal course conditions. We do this because the WSGA is usually a guest at somebody else's course, and most superintendents do not like players playing from the flower bed, especially on some of the very nice courses that we play on. And so if the ball is in a flower bed, that is a no play zone, you get free relief. I guess the best example in the state of Wisconsin would be the 16th at Century World, where the whole par 3 is basically a flower bed. And in that, most tournaments, including the WSGA's girls, I don't know, it's girls junior, I believe played it as a no play zone abnormal course condition, meaning it is mandatory that you take relief and you take it under the ground under repair rules.
It is impossible then to have a no play zone that's an abnormal course condition inside of a penalty area. It has to all be penalty area.
Yes. The question is a no play zone, does it have to be in either an abnormal course condition or a no play or a penalty area? And the answer is yes, and they are mutually exclusive. You cannot have it in both an abnormal course condition and a penalty area. It has to be in one or the other. Let's see what we got here. Point of maximum available relief. This is, I must say, an interesting concept, and one that hardly ever comes up. And the reason that it hardly ever comes up is if there is no spot in a bunker where you can drop a ball, generally Bill has not started the tournament. And if we suspend play, we're not going to restart that tournament until the rules officials or Bill or whoever looks at the bunkers and determines that there is at least a spot in the bunker that is no near the hole in which you could drop the ball. And if there is one bunker for which it's simply underwater and the tournament hasn't started, the tournament committee would most likely declare the bunker itself as ground under repair. So it's unlikely that this comes in, but it's in the rules, so let's go through it. It's the reference point for taking relief from an abnormal course condition in a bunker or on a putting green when there is no nearest point of complete relief. It is the estimated point where the ball would lie that is nearest to its original spot, but not near the hole, in the required area, and where the abnormal course condition least interferes with the stroke the player would have made if the condition were not there. So what you're picturing is your ball is in temporary water in a bunker. You have to, if you take relief, you must move away from the hole. You can't move near the hole. And what we're assuming under this is that the water goes all the way to the back of the bunker, such that there is no possibility that you can take, quote, complete relief. This rule says you can then find the point of maximum available relief, and it is the point where the water least interferes with the stance and the swing where the player will take. And the point of maximum available relief may be where the ball will be in shallower water, or where the player will stand, or where the ball is in deeper water, but where the player will stand is less. So in other words, what you do is that you compare the total distance of the water that you're standing on and where the ball is, and you compare it with another spot where where you're standing and where the ball is. And you pick the spot where that number is the smallest. That is your point of maximum available relief. On the putting green, it could be the spot where the line of play where the ball needs to go through the shallowest or the shortest stretch of water. Again, it's very hard to conceive that we would be running a tournament where the putting greens are such that you can't putt on the putting green because the water is deep. Can't be putted on. Temporary water. Page 221. Any temporary accumulation of water on the surface of the ground that is not in a penalty area and can be seen before or after the player takes a stance without pressing down excessively with his feet, with his or her feet. The concept there is if the player goes to the spot and the water, the ground is kind of squishy, that's not temporary water. If the player jumps up and down and says, see, here's the water, that's not temporary water because it must be seen when you take the stance. And there's an old expression that it's the stance, not the dance. So if the person is dancing up and down and that's the only way you can see the water, it's not temporary water. From a rules perspective, this is one of the hardest determinations to make because you often see the question of you may see water where the ball is, but not where the feet are, or vice versa. And then you're trying to give them relief and you're not quite sure where the water is. But the definition is clear, even if its application is not. You must be able to see the water either present either before or after the stroke is taken. All right, let's plow through 16. This is the old Rule 24, which is abnormal obstructions, 25.1, which was abnormal ground conditions, 25.2, which was embedded ball, and a rules decision called dangerous animal condition, I think it was called. The good point is it's now put into one rule. All of these have in common the fact that those items cannot be, those objects cannot be moved, so the relief the player will get will be they will be moving the ball, not the object. Rule 16 covers when and how the player may take free relief by playing a ball from a different place. These conditions are not treated as part of the challenge of playing the course. Free relief is generally allowed except in the penalty area. The player normally takes relief by dropping the ball in the relief area based on the nearest point of complete relief. All right, 16.1. Abnormal course condition, including a move obstructions. This rule covers free relief that is allowed from interference by the four things: animal holes, ground under repair, immovable obstructions, and temporary water, collectively known as abnormal course conditions. Rule does not give relief from movable obstructions, which we just had under Rule 15, and you don't get free relief from boundary objects or integral objects. When relief is allowed, meaning of relief, meaning of interference. Interference exists when any one of these is true. The player's ball touches or is in or on an abnormal course condition. For example, the ball is on a cart path. Obviously, it touches the cart path. Bullet point 2, an abnormal course condition physically interferes with the player's area of intended stance or area of intended swing. Obvious example of that is you're standing on a cart path to make a swing at a ball that's off the cart path. Come under bullet point 2. Only when the ball is on the putting green, an abnormal course condition on or off the putting green intervenes, not interferes, but intervenes on the line of play. This is a slight change from the old rules because notice the abnormal course condition does not need to be on the putting green. So an example of that would be your ball is on the putting green and you are putting on a very severely sloped green, and your normal line of play to make that putt would be to putt slightly off the putting green and have it dribble down to the hole. If there is an abnormal course condition, such as a sprinkler head that is on your line of play, this is saying you're going to get free relief. As we're going to see in a minute, that means you're actually going to be able to move your ball so that you don't have to putt over the sprinkler head. If the abnormal course condition is close enough to distract the player but does not meet these requirements, there's no interference. And if you look at the drawing on 16.1a, most of us are familiar with this. B1 is where the ball is. You have interference. You're going to move the ball to P1, then you're going to be dropping it in that relief area. because P1 is the nearest point of complete relief. The point of this drawing is to show you how close the ball is, B1 is to P1. Whereas when you get down to the bottom of that drawing, the ball is at B2, the player's feet are standing on the cart path. In order to get his feet off, in other words, to have complete relief, the player has to get his feet to the dark black foot marks, and the nearest point of complete relief is going to be P2, and then the player is going to get his the 1 club length relief area. So as a general proposition, you can see that we're going to see you have to go to the nearest point of complete relief, but it can be different depending on what side of the cart path you're going to and whether you're a left-handed player or a right-handed player. All right, parent 2, relief allowed anywhere on course except when ball is in penalty area. Relief from interference by an abnormal course condition is allowed under Rule 16.1 only when both the abnormal course condition is on the course, meaning it's not out of bounds, and the ball is anywhere except the penalty area. So that's the two things you got to have. So if you're standing in temporary water out of bounds and your ball is on the course, you do not get free relief from that temporary water. Why? Because it's not on the course. If you hit your ball into a penalty area and there is a old fence or something that's immovable, you don't get relief from that object. And then the third caveat is you don't get relief, there's no relief when it's clearly unreasonable to play the ball, which normally is going to come up either because you're adopting an unreasonable swing or choice of club. But if it's reasonable to do so, you are going to get relief. So let's take a couple of examples. Your ball is in the middle of the fairway. You're a right-handed player. You got 150 yards and you take out your 7 or 8 iron, but your ball's in a real bad lie. So you say, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to hit left-handed. I'm going to turn the club upside down. And then to do so, I'm going to be standing on a sprinkler head. Then I'm going to get free relief because I'm standing on the sprinkler head. What this says is, if that's unreasonable, you're not going to get relief. And most likely it is unreasonable to play a left-handed shot from 150 yards for no reason other than to get off the sprinkler head. But there are situations, assuming that player has a situation where in order to play the right-handed shot, the ball is on the right side of a tree, and he can't physically make a stroke when the ball is on the right side of the tree. So he then goes over to the other side, tips the club upside down to play left-handed. And when he's doing that, his feet are on a cart path. In that situation, that is not unreasonable, and the player is going to get free relief from that situation. Once he drops the ball, he then can take and play in any direction that he wants under the circumstances.
Number 3 at the end of the last video, there's an out of bounds fence, and then there's this immovable transformer that the only legitimate shot the person had was a left-handed shot.
Yeah.
Took the relief, but then could play the ball right-handed.
And if you are a rules official, when the player says to you, do I get relief from this? Your answer should not be yes or no. Your question should follow, what do you mean by this? And then you have the player explain to you why they're doing what they're doing. And then when you get done, you say to the player, okay, if this, whatever, cart path was not there, if this sprinkler head was not there, how would you play your stroke? And if they convince you that this is the normal stroke I play, I put my right foot 2 feet back, I stretch forward with my 3-wood, if that's the way they always play their shot, that's reasonable. But they got to convince you that this is the way I always do it. All right, 16.1b, relief for ball in general area. This is probably the most standard question you get as a rules official. The ball's on a cart path. What does the player always say? Do I get 1 club length? That's what they always say, right? What I always say to them is it's a two-step process. Keep that in mind. If you say that to the player, they'll say, what do you mean it's a two-step process? And you say, you have to first find your nearest point of complete relief, and then you get one club length. And that nearest point of complete relief could be 10 feet away. So when the player says, do I get one club length? Generally what's in the player's mind is where the ball lies, he measures one club length. And that's why it's good to say this is a two-step process. You find the nearest point of complete relief, and then you get your one club length. So if you look at 16.1b, it says the reference point. It's the nearest point of complete relief in the general area, because your ball is in the general area. The size, we know it's going to be one club length, because everything's one club length, unless it's lateral penalty relief. And the limit is it must be in the general area, must not be near the hole. There must be complete relief. And of course, the key is complete relief. So let's look at the diagram on the next page, 16.1b. Looks like the committee has nicely marked this area with white line. That is ground under repair, abnormal course condition. So what do? You find the nearest point of complete relief, which is that black circle, and that assumes that the player, if it's a right-handed player, his left foot is outside that white circle. If his foot is still in that white circle, he then has to move further back, and that black dot is going to be further back away from the hole. Once you find that, that's the first step process, nearest point of complete relief, then you're going to get one club length, no nearer the hole. Remember, one club length is not the length of the club he measures with, it's a precise figure, size of the driver when you tee off, 43 inches, 44 inches. All right, 16.1c, relief for ball in bunker. So you look at the drawing on the next page, which is 16.1c. Your ball is in temporary water, that's the blue stuff. What do? You find two-step process. You find the nearest point of complete relief, which is the black dot, and then you're going to get one club length no nearer the hole. You'll notice that the right side of that relief area is truncated, and that's because if you dropped it there, your ball would still be in the temporary water, and you would not have complete relief. And the theory of 16.1 is that you must have complete relief. So then you drop it in that relief area. If you're taking relief, free relief under 16.1c from a bunker, you have to drop it in the bunker. New for 2019 is the Parent 2, the bottom of 137, penalty relief playing from outside the bunker. This is the back on the line relief procedure. So the ball is in the temporary water, in the blue stuff, and you decide that you just can't play out of bunkers. You know that you have to drop it in the bunker. You don't want to do that. The new rules allow you now to go back on the line. So you draw the line from the flagstick through the ball back as far as you want. That is back on the line. You then put your tee down and you get one club length no near the hole. But you're going to get a penalty stroke. Now notice that it is a penalty stroke, but you still only get one club length. Why? Because it's not lateral penalty relief, it's just penalty relief. If you look at the drawing on page 16, I'm sorry, on page 137, 16.1c, let's say the player doesn't want to take relief in the relief area that is in the bunker, but he wants to go back on the line. Can the player drop it back on the line in the bunker? And the answer is yes. He's still going to get one penalty stroke, but he can drop it in the bunker. It would be odd to do that, but it is permissible. If you look at the
sheer wall.
let's look at the actual, John's going to cover this more on 17, but let's go over it now. The bottom of 137, the reference point. It's a point on the course chosen by the player that is on the reference line and is further from the hole than the original spot. In choosing this reference point, the player should indicate the point by using an object such as a tee. If the player drops the ball without having chosen this point, the reference point is treated as being the point on the line that is the same distance from the hole as where the dropped ball first touched the ground. So when you're choosing the back on the line, ideally you put a tee down, you then get one club length near the hole. If you don't do it, it's treated as where it hits the course. So if you don't do it, if you don't put a tee down, it hits the course, it moves 2 inches further, you have now played outside the relief area. And you're going to get a 2-stroke penalty for playing from the wrong place. 2 inches closer to the hole, you're going to get a penalty for playing in the wrong place because you are outside a relief area. In April of last year, the WSGA did not like this result, so it issued what's called Model Local Rule E12, which permits the committee to adopt E12, which the WSGA has done. And the only thing that E12 does is to take away the penalty if you have dropped and played the ball from within 1 club length of where it hit the course. So what it does is you are still required under the rule, if the ball moves forward, you're still required to redrop because it's outside the relief area. But under the Model Local Rule E12, you don't get a penalty as long as it's within 1 club length of where it first hit the course.
Now, Dan, going back to what you said about taking back on the line in the bunker, it would be odd to do that. But what if you drop within the constraints of nearest point of complete relief 1 club length? Is the intent an issue there, or is that then no penalty? I drop back on the line, but I actually satisfy nearest point of complete relief 1 club length on my back on the line. Am I going to get the penalty? Because
yeah,
my intent was to go back on the line.
The question is, when you're dropping in a relief area, is your intent important or is the outcome important? And the answer is the outcome is important. If you drop and it comes to rest in the relief area, even if you intended to drop outside the course, if you happen to drop it on the course in the correct relief area, you're just fine. So it's not intent based, it's where it's outcome based. So in the example on 16.1c, it doesn't look like it's possible, but if you went back on the line and you dropped it, intending to go back on the line, but you dropped it in what is marked as the relief area there, it actually landed in that relief area and stayed in that relief area, and then you played it, you would not get, there would not be a 1-stroke penalty. I don't know how you would know that, but that's the outcome. All right, 16.1d, relief for ball and putting green. What we've been talking about up to now is the 2-step process for taking relief. This one I refer to as the 1-step process. And the reason it's a 1-step process is you're taking relief for a ball on the putting green. The only thing you do is you find the nearest point of complete relief and you place your ball there. Don't have to go through the 2nd step of finding the 1 club length and dropping your ball. So if you look at the drawing, the diagram 16.1d as in dog, excuse me, this is a left-handed player. The ball is in the temporary water. Since the player, excuse me, is left-handed, the nearest point of complete relief is just outside the water. The player simply places the ball there. You don't drop it, you don't measure your 1 club length, you just place it. And if the ball was on the very left-hand side of this, and the player to get his feet out of the water, if his nearest point complete relief was off the putting green, as long as it's in the general area, the player will simply place the ball. So it may be odd to say that you place your ball off the putting green, but you do that because the ball was on the putting green initially. Okay, let's go at 16.1E as in Easter. Relief for ball not found but in or on abnormal course condition. So an example of that would be you hit your ball into an area just off the fairway. It's marked as ground under repair. The spectator says, yes, I saw the ball go into that area. Another example would be the 6th hole at the bog. There is about 250 yards off the teeing area. There is an old shed. And assuming the committee has not marked that as ground under repair, or sorry, as an integral part of the course, that would be an example of a abnormal course condition. And if the ball goes in the shed and you don't find it, but it's known or virtually certain that it's in there, you're going to come under Rule 16E. Rule 16E is a 3-step process. And the reason it's a 3-step process is because you don't know where the ball is, you then have to find a spot or locate a spot and say that's where the ball is. Then you take your 2-step process. So you hit your ball into the building on the bog at 16. You know it's in there. You can't find it. The first step is you then locate the spot where the point where the ball last crossed the edge of the abnormal course condition, the building. And you treat it as if the ball were lying right there. Then you're going to take your 2-step process. You're going to find your nearest point of complete relief. So you have to get far enough away so that your swing is not interfered with by the shed. Then you take your 1 club length and you drop it no nearer the hole. So it's a 3-step process because you have to first say the ball is located at the point where it last crossed the edge. Then you find, the second is you find your nearest point of complete relief. And then the third is you get your 1 club length no near the hole. All right, 16.1F. Relief must be taken from interference by no play zone in abnormal course condition. In each of these situations, the ball must not be played as it lies. When ball is in no play zone, if the player's ball is in the no play zone in an abnormal course condition, in the general area or in a bunker, the no play zone in the general area, you take free relief under 16. If it's in a bunker, under 16.1C, and on the putting green, 16.1D. It would be odd to have a no play zone on the putting green, but there it is. And then parent 2, when the no play zone interferes with the stance or swing for the ball anywhere on a course except the penalty area. This comes up because of the difference between ground under repair and a penalty area. So you could have a situation, you're a right-handed player, you hit your ball into a no play zone on the left side of the hole, but your ball's not quite in the no play zone, but you have to stand in the no play zone to make your swing. You have to take relief because it's a no play zone. And again, as a reminder, the WSGA treats all flower beds as a no play zone in an abnormal course condition.
How is a flower bed, the edges of a flower bed defined? Is it by the flowers that may be hanging over, or is it by the edging?
It's usually by the edge. There's no edging.
The question was, how do you define the edge of the ground under repair if the ball is in a flower bed? Generally speaking, it's going to be one of 2 ways. Either it's going to be very noticeable because there's a brick wall of some sort that segregates it, or if not, the committee is obligated to draw a white line or somehow indicate where the ground under repair starts and where it ends. Dangerous animal condition, 16.2. This used to be in an old decision. Now we have an actual rule on it. The first thing to notice is it says dangerous animal condition. It does not say dangerous course condition. So if your ball is in poison ivy, that is not a dangerous animal condition. That is a dangerous court condition. You're not going to get relief. Dangerous animal conditions exist when a dangerous animal, such as a poisonous snake, stinging bee, alligator, blah, 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 near a ball could cause serious physical injury to the player if he or she had to play the ball as it lies. Player may take relief under 16.2b from interference by a dangerous animal condition, no matter where his or her ball is on the course. This is different than a penalty area. So if you are in a penalty area and your ball is next to an alligator, you are going to get free relief if you want it. We're going to see that you're going to have to drop in the penalty area, but you're going to get free relief. If your ball is in a penalty area next to a abnormal immovable obstruction, you don't get relief. But for the dangerous animal, you do. Yeah.
Who's in charge of determining whether it's poisonous snake?
Well, if I'm playing in the event and I have any doubt, I say it's dangerous. It's a dangerous animal. The snake does not have to be, quote, poisonous to meet the definition of dangerous. That is merely one example of a dangerous animal. Similarly with bees, how do you know whether those are the nice bees, the whatever they're called, the hunting bees, or the real stinging type? Well, I think if you're in doubt, you convince the rules official that it's dangerous. All right, 16.2b, relief for dangerous animal condition. When ball is anywhere except the penalty area, player take relief under, we've just gone through this, 16.1b if it's a general area, C if it's the bunker, or D if it's on the putting green. And when the ball is in a penalty area, you can take free relief, but you got to drop it in the penalty area, or you can take penalty relief and go outside the penalty area. So you have that option. So if your ball is in a penalty area and it is right next to an alligator, most likely that would be considered a dangerous animal, you can move back in the penalty area far enough so that you don't have interference from the crocodile or alligator, or you can go outside the penalty area and then drop. And for the last part of 16.2b, the purpose of this rule, the nearest point of complete relief, means the nearest point where the dangerous animal condition does not exist. I have no idea how far that is if your ball is next to an alligator. I can tell you if my ball is within 10 feet, it's pretty obvious. If I'm 100 yards away, I'm feeling pretty safe. Where it goes from non-dangerous to dangerous, I haven't the faintest idea. But that's why you have a rules official and you make your best judgment and move on. All right, 16.3, embedded ball. When relief is allowed, ball must be embedded in the general area. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. We're only talking about an embedded ball in the general area. This is a change from the old rules. The old rules required it to be closely mown area, and now if it's anywhere in the general area, you're going to get relief. There is no relief under this rule if the ball is embedded anywhere except in the general area, but if the ball is embedded on the putting green, the player may mark the spot, replace it. So that, but what they're really saying is if it's embedded on the putting green, don't worry about it. You're going to go to 13.1c and you're going to take relief under the putting green. Exception. When relief not allowed for ball embedded in the general area, relief is not allowed when the ball is embedded in sand. This is an odd rule because you have the rule, you have the exception, and then you have the exception to the exception. The exception to the exception means you're back under the general rule. The general rule is you get relief for your ball in a general area. Exception is you don't get it if it's in sand. The exception to the exception, which brings it back to the you do get relief, is if the sand is in a closely mown area. So what does that mean? That means if you hit your ball into the middle of the fairway and it is embedded in a sand-filled divot, you then are back to the original rule, which means you are allowed to take free relief from the embedded ball. But notice that it must be an embedded ball, which means it has to be embedded in the sand-filled divot. It cannot be a situation where it's simply lying, it bounces on the course, and then it rolls into a sand-filled divot. That's not an embedded ball. Determining whether a ball is embedded. A player's ball is embedded only if it's in its own pitch mark made as a result of the player's previous stroke and part of the ball is below the level of the ground. If the player cannot tell for sure whether the ball is in its own pitch mark or a pitch mark made by another ball, the player may treat the ball as embedded if it's reasonable to conclude from the available information that the ball is in its own pitch mark. One of my other favorite holes is the 15th at Strawberry Creek. Is that the par 3? The 15th at Strawberry Creek, it's usually about 200 yards. It's downhill. The right side of that, right up by the green, is usually closely shaven. It's fairway. And often the ball will hit there and roll back, or it hits on the green and it rolls back. And towards the end of the tournament, there'll be a lot of pitch marks just right and short of that green. In order to play your ball as an embedded ball, it must land in the pitch mark created by your tee shot. So if it lands and then rolls back into one, you do not get relief unless it's your own pitch mark. What this language that says reasonable to conclude is if you're the first player out and it's 200 yards up and there's only one pitch mark and your ball's in it, and you saw your ball hop up and come back, it's pretty likely that you can conclude that it's in your pitch mark. However, if it's towards the end of the day and there are 100 pitch marks and the ball hits and goes up in the air and rolls back, it must be reasonable to conclude that the ball is in the pitch mark. And it likely would not be unless your eyesight is so good, or if there was a rules official that said, son of a gun, I saw it bounce up and it went right back in the spot. But remember, the key is it must be the pitch mark from your previous stroke. A ball is not embedded if it's below the level of the ground as a result of anything other than the player's previous stroke, such as stepping on it, ball is driven into the ground without being airborne, or ball is dropped and taking relief. So you're taking relief from a cart path and you drop your ball and it embeds. Do you get relief? Not under this rule, you don't. Do you get relief under any rule? I don't think so. Your ball is now in play, assuming that you've dropped it in the right way and in the relief area. And you put the ball as it lies.
It could be a strong indication that maybe the
It could be that the committee should suspend play. It could also be an indication, although not likely to have happened in a WSGA event, where the committee didn't do its job carefully. But that would be unlikely in a WSGA event.
Well, and am I correct in remembering it's also a change now? So if you're taking relief from a embedded ball, you drop and it re-embeds, play it. In the past, you re-drop it.
Yeah, I mean, that goes against the decision that allowed a dropped ball that embedded was an embedded ball.
Let me
It's not the case anymore.
Let me repeat that for the people online. The question is, if your ball is an embedded ball and you then take relief, you then drop it appropriately in the relief area, and when you drop it, it drops and it, quote, embeds, and that's a quote. It is not, quote, an embedded ball under Rule 16.3. It is merely a ball that is slightly below the ground. It is not an embedded ball, and you would not get relief. Under the old rules, if an quote, embedded the second time, you would then get to drop again. The new rules say, no, that's not the case. And notice that under the new rules, it's less likely to happen because you're dropping from knee height.
Referencing that, you just said when you're taking relief from an embedded ball and then you drop it in there, that's a sign. Is the same thing true as if you're just taking penalty relief and it drops and it bends?
Anytime
you have to play it as a.
Anytime you drop them.
Yeah. The question was, is it true that anytime you drop a ball and it, quote, embeds, meaning that it goes partly into the earth, do you get additional relief from that free relief? And the answer is no, because the whole purpose of the embedded ball rule is it must be embedded from the previous stroke the player has made and in its own pitch mark. And if you drop it, by definition, it's not in your pitch mark. All right, 16.3b, relief for embedded ball. The diagram 16.3b on page 143. This is a slight change, but it's consistent with the rules that anytime you drop a ball, you drop in a relief area. The old rules, you dropped at a spot. Now you don't. You find the spot immediately behind where the ball embedded. You then get your one club length no near the hole, and you drop in that spot. 16.4. Lifting ball to see if it lies in condition where relief allowed. This is a new change to the rules, but not a change in it was part of a decision before. Now it's actually in the rules. If a player reasonably believes that his ball lies in a condition where free relief is allowed, but cannot decide without lifting the ball, the player may lift the ball to see if relief is allowed, but the spot must be marked and the lifted ball must not be cleaned except on the putting green. So again, this is a change in the sense that you don't need to announce. Under the old rules, you had to announce that you were doing this. Now you'd simply mark the spot, and then you look to see whether you're entitled to get relief. So as an example, you're not sure whether it's embedded, so you mark the spot, you pick it up, you determine that it's not embedded, you put it back. Another example could be there is a tuft of grass right in front of your ball. You can't tell whether it's loose or not, and so you move it to see whether it's loose. You determine that it's attached to the ground. You simply put it back. If a player lifts his ball without having reasonable belief, except on the putting green, he gets one penalty stroke. If relief is allowed, the player takes relief, but there's no penalty even if the player did not mark the spot of the ball before lifting it or cleaning it. If relief is not allowed, or if the player chooses not to take relief, the player gets one penalty stroke if he did not mark the spot, and the ball must be replaced. And of course, if you don't replace it in the right spot, you're then going to get the general penalty for playing from a wrong place.
Interesting question, but I'll let you read it.
Let me read the question online. On the no play zone discussion, if flowers are in a no play zone and ball stance is outside of no play zone, but the flowers will interfere with your swing, you must take relief from the flowers. It's a question, do you have to take relief from the flowers? And the answer to that question is yes, and it is determined by the fact that ground under repair means something that is growing in the ground under repair, as well as stuff that could actually hang outside the edge of the ground under repair. So if you were taking your stance and your swing, your ball is outside, but as you take your swing, you would touch or brush the flowers in your backswing, then you have interference from a no play zone in an abnormal course condition, And not only may you take relief, but you are required to take relief.
Yeah, I mean, any grass, bush, tree, or other growing or natural object rooted in the defined area, including any part of those objects that extends up above the ground outside the edge of the defined area. You know, so that's part of it.
And there, for those of you who want to know, there's actually a rules interpretation on that. It's under no play zone. And it is on page 354 of the official guide. It's no play zone /1, status of growing things, overhanging, and no play zone. And as we talked about earlier, that's the distinction between a penalty area and a ground under repair. In a penalty area, anything that is growing in the penalty area but hanging on over onto the general course, and if your swing would hit the tall grass that is hanging over the general area, you do not get relief from the penalty area. There is no interference. However, ground under repair, if your swing interferes with stuff that is growing in the ground under repair, whether that interference is because the swing hits it while it's in there, or if it hangs over the edge such that your swing would actually hit the grass that is growing in and hanging out in the ground under repair situation, then you do have interference, and if it's a no play zone, relief is mandatory. All right, unless there's any further questions under 16, Bill is now going to go through the rules questions that he has for 15, 16, and 14, 15, 16.
Obviously, we do these questions in hopes that it'll help you prepare to take either the 80 question test or the 100. And I know there's several in the room that would agree with me. One of the best places, if you want to look for questions, is a website called generalarea.org. And if you're really feeling gung-ho about taking rules tests, they have a 500 question quiz, which breaks down as follows. They have 125 true or false basic level or intermediate level, true false questions. Questions 126 through 250 are multiple choice with 3 answers. So it's a little bit better than the WSGA where they give you 4 answers. Then you move on into the advanced section, and questions 251 through 375 are advanced level questions, but they're true false. And then questions 376 through 500 are multiple choice advanced level questions. I can tell you this, if you go through the 500 questions, you'll learn so much, it's not even funny. The answers are immediately below the question. If you want to see it while you're reading the question, at least ask yourself, why is the answer the way it is? If you don't understand it, look it up. If you further don't understand it, call one of us or the WSGA for an explanation. But that website and those questions are wonderful and a great way to prepare for the test, whichever one you're going to take. Generalarea.org. It used to be called Through the Green, but in 2019, in keeping with the new terminology, he had to spend another however many $100 to update his website and rename it, and it's now generalarea.org. And it's written by a gentleman by the name of Lou Blakey, who's without a doubt one of the best rules minds in the world.
I can give one tip for preparing. I use
Sure.
that every year. I take the test early on, and I mark the questions differently, if I got it wrong and I just totally got it wrong, I just put an X through it because I screwed it up. I just didn't have the rule right. If I get it right, but I didn't know why, I just got lucky. You know, it's just I narrowed it down to 2 things and I went at 50-50 and I got it, I circle it. The ones I get right because I absolutely know it, I don't even bother putting a mark on it. So when I go to study future, you know, before the test, instead of taking the 500 question test, I'll go back and look at my X's and my O's. The ones that I didn't get right, it takes you back to the rule that you didn't know. And the ones that you guessed at and got it right, you need to figure out why you weren't quite sure. I mean, it's just I did the same thing in the old decisions book, but you can't do that anymore because it's not a question and answer format.
Right.
The
But
questions don't change every time you go to the site.
it's
Not random.
They'll change it up. I mean, they'll have a new
each year.
but then it's the same questions, just
Well, those are 2 different websites. Yeah. Bill's talking about
General.
generalarea.org by Lou Blakey. Those 500 questions do not change. Those are right through 500.
It's a PDF.
If you go to the USGA's
I know.
website,
I know.
those change. Okay.
But I'm telling you, the 500 questions by Lou Blakey are fantastic. And I can assure you, a great way to learn. I know last year when I took the test, the night before, I whipped through all 500 questions. It's a wonderful learning tool in terms of if the answer is right there, you see what's correct. If, you know, read the question, maybe cover up the answer, and then try to answer it. If you're right, great. If you're not, try to figure out why you're not correct. And usually sometimes you misread a word or this or that. You know, I can tell you in taking the test, take the time to read everything. Read the entire question and read every answer, even if you think you're 100% sure of an answer that you've read. So let's go through some of the questions that we've picked. Thomas has these up on the screen, and dealing with Rule 14. In which of the following is the player not required to drop his ball again? So the situation is the player drops his ball in the right way in the relief area such that it lands in the general area and then rolls onto and comes to rest on a putting green when relief was properly taken under Rule 17 penalty area for a ball last crossing the edge of a red penalty area near the putting green. B, the ball lands in the general area and then rolls into and comes to rest in a portion of the relief area that is in the bunker. C, the ball rolls to and comes to rest in a position where there is interference for the player's stance by the cart path from which relief was initially taken under Rule 16.1b for relief from an abnormal course condition for a ball in the general area. Or D, when the ball rolls when taking relief under Rule 16.3b embedded ball, the player's ball rolls into a position where his stance is on the location where the ball was embedded. So we'll go through them really quick. A, is that correct? And the answer is no. When I drop for a penalty area and it talks about the limits on the location, I can drop in any area of the course, but the ball must come to rest in the same area of the course in which the ball landed when dropped. So if it had landed on the putting green, I'd be okay in that. But it landed in the general area, so I would have to redrop. Answer B, the ball rolls into and comes to rest in a portion of the relief area that is in the bunker. Exact same thing. When I drop a ball, it's got to come to rest in the area of the course in which it first landed in the relief area. C, the ball rolls to and comes to rest in a position where there is interference by the player's stance by the cart path from which relief was initially taken. I definitely have to redrop. I mean, if I was seeking interference and I still have interference, I have to drop again. But answer D is the correct answer. And why? The embedded ball has nothing to do with stance. It's whether the ball is embedded below the level of the surface of the ground. So if my ball were dropped and it rolled into a location where my stance is, the pitch mark that my ball had made, I'm now standing on that, I wouldn't need to drop the ball again and my ball would be in play. So D is the correct answer. 33, also dealing with Rule 14. In stroke play, a player takes relief from a penalty area. He stands back on the line from the hole through the point the ball last crossed the edge of the penalty area, holds his arm to the side at knee height, and drops the ball 1 foot to the side of this line. In addition to the one-stroke penalty under Rule 17.1D penalty area, the ruling is A, he proceeded correctly, B, he gets no additional penalty if he corrects the incorrect drop before making a stroke. Otherwise, he incurs a 2-stroke penalty, which would be for playing from a wrong place. C, he gets 2 additional penalty strokes and must play the ball as it lies. D, he gets 2 additional penalty strokes and must correct the incorrect drop. And I can tell you that this is one where if you were really good at the old rules and really not so good at the new rules, your first blink, like mine, might have been he dropped off the line. But in dropping back on the line, you get a club length. And a foot, I don't care how young or how short the player's clubs are, 1 foot is going to be within the relief area from the back on the line. So the correct answer to that question is A, the player had proceeded correctly. And hopefully you didn't initially make the mistake like I did in thinking that it was a wrong place. But there's an example where you really want to read the words and know what the words mean. Question 34, also pertaining to Rule 14. In stroke play, a player's ball lies in a penalty area and is believed to be covered by twigs, grass clippings, and leaves. He searches for the ball by moving twigs, grass clippings, and leaves in the penalty area with a club and his feet. The player sweeps away a pile of leaves with his foot and accidentally kicks and moves the ball that is within the penalty area. The player then decides not to replace the ball and proceeds under the penalty area rule using the back on the line relief option. The player gets how many penalty strokes in total for this situation? So first of all, he moved his ball at rest, right? But when did he move his ball at rest? While searching for it. So we kind of learned under Rule 9.4 that if my ball is moved while searching for it, there's no penalty and I have to replace it. But I don't have to replace it if I'm allowed to play from a different spot. So the correct answer is A, there's 1 penalty stroke, and that's the penalty stroke for proceeding under the water hazard rule. Any questions on that? Are we pretty clear on that? Question 35, which is our last question for number 14. In stroke play on the 13th hole, a player makes his first stroke from within the teeing area, and the ball comes to rest in a penalty area. After surveying the situation, the player decides to proceed under Rule 17.1D, Parent 1, which is stroke and distance. He returns to the teeing area, and by mistake, the player plays a ball in front of the tee markers outside the teeing area. And plays ball outside the teeing area, plays the ball from there, meaning outside the teeing area, and that ball comes to rest in the middle of the fairway. The player from there takes 3 more strokes to hole out. What is the correct score? So let's kind of go through this. The first stroke from the tee is number 1. This is where you want to have your strokes and penalty strokes grid. Under a penalty stroke of stroke and distance under Rule 17.1D, parent 1, he returns to the tee, and by mistake, the player tees a ball in front of the tee markers and plays from there. So has the player played from the correct place? The answer is no. So he's played from a wrong place, for sure. What's the penalty for playing from a wrong place in stroke play? 2 strokes. So let's add 2 more strokes in the penalty column. So we now have 3 penalty strokes, and right now 1 stroke, and then the stroke that he made from outside the teeing area counts because it wasn't in starting play of the hole. So that's 2. That ball came to rest in the middle of the fairway, and I took 3 more strokes, 1, 2, 3, to hole out. So I should have 5 actual talent strokes and 3 penalty strokes. So the correct answer should be 8. And hopefully everyone sees that. You know, I'll tell you, the hardest questions you can have on this test, not that they don't try to trick you on all of them, but where you have to come up with a number, and you better be right. I mean, there isn't several correct answers. But I'm telling you, this is a great exercise, because if it happened in real life, which it does, a player is going to look at you and say, what's my score for the hole? And you need to be able to tell them that. So moving on to question 36, pertaining to Rule 15. In 4-ball match play, with side AB, both the ball of player A and the ball of player B, who are partners, lie in the same bunker. Player A lifts some loose impediments lying in the bunker, affecting his or her play. What is the ruling? Well, first of all, let's just start with, is a player allowed to move loose impediments in a bunker? Yes. Does that rule say anything about affecting the play of his partner? No. So what's the answer? No penalty. So the correct answer is C. But do you see how with the partner situation and affecting the way they ask the question kind of affects how you think about the question. But if you just understand the simple rule itself, that'll help. Moving on to question 37, also pertaining to Rule 15. In stroke play, as a result of his tee shot, the first stroke, the player's ball lies in a bunker, resting against a rake. The ball is near but has no interference from a hole that was dug by a dog. The player's caddy marks the position of the ball and lifts the rake, which causes the ball to move. The ball rolls into the hole, meaning the hole that was dug by the dog. The caddy is able to retrieve the ball. The player drops it within the bunker within 1 club length of the nearest point of complete relief from the hole that was dug by the dog, not near the hole, and then takes 4 more strokes to complete play of that hole. So this is another one where we're going to make a little grid for strokes and penalty strokes. So the first stroke, the ball lies in a bunker. And my ball was resting against a rake, which is a movable obstruction. The player's caddy marks the position of the ball and lifts the rake, which causes the ball to move. First of all, is the caddy allowed to move the obstruction? Yeah. Okay. It caused the ball to move. Is there a penalty in moving a movable obstruction? No. But what does that rule require me to do? Replace the ball on the spot from which it was moved. In this case, the ball rolled into a hole, and then I drop as though I'm taking relief. So I'm now playing from what? The wrong place under the movable obstruction rule. So I get 2 penalty strokes, and I take 4 more strokes, 1, 2, 3, 4, to hole out. So hopefully you all get that the correct answer is 7 strokes, which it is. And anyone not clear on that one? But that's a terrific question. Yeah, you know, when I moved the rake and the ball moved, what caused the ball to move? The player removing the rake or the movable obstruction. So rule 50. The hole has nothing to do with it. The initial interference was the rake. And once I moved the rake and the ball moved, I'm required under 15.2 to replace the ball where it was prior to the removal of the obstruction. And that would, yeah, that would have been a little different, but the caddy's allowed to remove the rake, and the player is obligated to replace the ball, which he didn't. Under question 38, last one pertaining to Rule 15, player A and B are playing player C and D in a 4-ball match. Player B's ball is near the hole in a position to serve as a backstop for player A's ball. Player C requests that player B lift his ball. Player B does not comply. Player A's putt strikes player B's ball. Which of the following is correct? Well, I hope for sure you know that when player B did not comply with the request for player C, that player B is getting the general penalty. In a partner thing, then you just simply have to ask, did that action help his partner or adversely affect his opponent? If the answer to that is yes, the partner gets the applicable penalty. Well, we can run through the answers. There is no penalty. B was entitled to leave his ball in position A, in position to help player A because it was their side to play. Maybe if we were on the PGA Tour. No, I'm just kidding. Never mind. That was a bad comment. Answer B, player B is disqualified from the hole, and there is no penalty to A. You know, if there had been no effect to player A, that may have been the answer, but unfortunately, player A's putt did strike player B's ball, and that leads us to answer C, which is player B is disqualified from the hole for failing to comply with player C's request, and player A is disqualified from the hole because player B's breach helped player A. So are they disqualified for the hole or the competition? The hole, not the competition. So the correct answer is C, and then answer D was side CB, or side AB is disqualified from the competition for player B's failure to comply with the rule affecting the rights of his opponent. That's not the answer. Moving on to question 39, pertaining to Rule 16. In which of the following cases may a player drop his ball without penalty? So we're going to come up with 4 situations, and you have to decide, is there a penalty for this situation? the player's ball is inside a penalty area, but his stance is in the general area and is in temporary water. Okay, do I get free relief or would I have to take a penalty? I'd have to take a penalty. The ball itself is in the penalty area. So that is the overriding thing. Answer B, his ball is in the general area, but his stance is now in the penalty area and on a rock wall that the committee has declared to be an integral object. So my ball is outside the penalty area. I'm not in the penalty area. I'm in the general area, but I have interference from an integral object, which just simply says I don't get free relief. So if I were to drop the ball in that situation, there would be a penalty. It wouldn't be one stroke, it'd be two, because I'd be playing from the wrong place. Answer C, his ball has disappeared or become lost down an underground drain pipe, which is an immovable obstruction, the entrance of which is inside a penalty area. That should send up red flags right there. If the entrance had been outside, it might be different, maybe. And that would only be if I wasn't able to retrieve the ball. So that's not the correct answer. And D, his ball is outside a penalty area, but his swing is interfered with by a penalty area stake, which was not movable. Okay, well, if my ball's outside the penalty area and I have interference from a stake which is not movable, what is that? An immovable obstruction. Am I entitled to relief from an immovable obstruction when my ball is outside a penalty area, which means I'm probably in the general area or a bunker or on the putting green? Yeah, so the correct answer there is D. Moving on to question 40. Also under Rule 16, player's tee shot goes towards the rough and a pump station, which is an immovable obstruction. Thinking he may not be able to find the ball, the player properly announces and plays a provisional ball. When he arrives to the area to search for his ball, he can't find it, but it is known that the original ball is in the pump station. So without even reading the answers, what situation do we have? We have a ball not found in an abnormal course condition, an immovable obstruction. So the ball is going to be deemed, if it's known or virtually certain, to be lying where the ball last crossed the edge of the abnormal course condition. And from there I get free relief. So let's now go through the answers. The player must proceed with the provisional ball and gets the penalty stroke. And he gets the penalty of stroke and distance. Okay, well, you are not obligated to proceed with your provisional ball if it's known or virtually certain that your ball is not, that has not been found, is known or virtually certain to be in the abnormal course condition. So A is not the correct answer. B, the player must abandon the provisional ball and must proceed under the abnormal course condition for a ball not found in the abnormal course condition. Ironically, under this rule, because my ball is lost, I have what we used to, Paul Hollingstead, bless his soul, used to call it a choosy. And I think that name's kind of stuck. Because your ball is lost in a condition on the course, you're allowed to either play the provisional or, because it's known or virtually certain, proceed under the abnormal course condition rule under free relief. So you have a choosy. So answer C, the player may proceed without penalty by determining the nearest point of complete relief from the point where the ball last crossed the edge of the pump station and drop a ball, which means the original or a substituted ball, within one club length of the nearest point of complete relief, not nearer than the hole, than that point. Or I may play, or the player may play his provisional ball under a penalty of stroke and distance. And if you go to the actual rule, Rule 16.1E, in the very first paragraph, it says, if a player's ball has not been found and it is known or virtually certain that the ball came to rest in or on an abnormal course condition on the course, the player may use this relief option instead of taking stroke and distance relief, which would mean either you proceed with your provisional, or if you hadn't hit a provisional, you could go back to the tee and play another one from the tee, because you can do that at any time. And obviously, we should read answer D just to eliminate it for sure. The player may proceed without penalty and drop a ball behind the pump station, keeping the point where the ball last crossed the edge of the pump station between the hole and the spot on which the ball is dropped, with no limit to how far behind the pump house the ball may be dropped, or play his provisional ball under a penalty of stroke and distance. Well, that's not correct, because we don't drop back on the line when we proceed under the abnormal course condition rule, unless we're proceeding under the penalty stroke from a ball in a bunker. That how you see it? Moving on, any questions? Yeah, when you take relief from an abnormal course condition, you're taking the nearest point of complete relief. But when the ball's not found, you have to, as Dan said, it becomes a three-step process. The first step is determining, for the purpose of applying the rule, where does my ball lie? And that rule itself tells you that the ball, if it's known or virtually certain that the ball has not been found and is in the condition, the ball is deemed to essentially be where it kind of knocked on the door or entered the door, where it last crossed. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah. So my ball would be deemed to be lying where it last crossed. I would determine the nearest point of complete relief from that point, and then drop somewhere in the relief area within a club length of and not near the hole than that point. Question 41 pertaining to embedded balls. Which of the following is false regarding the embedded ball rule? Answer A, with no local rule in place, a player is not entitled to relief for a ball which is embedded in its own pitch mark in grass in the rough, which is what part of the course? So if there's no local rule in place, am I entitled to relief in 2020 for an embedded ball in the general area? Yeah. So the fact that it says I'm not entitled to relief, so the answer to that is false. I can tell you, when you're taking a test, be careful. I know what I do is I write F next to that last period, and I go on and read the next three, because I might not be right with my initial answer. So keep reading. A player whose ball is known to have rolled into a pitch mark made by a previous player's ball is not entitled to relief. That's a true statement. Only his own pitch mark. Answer C, a player whose ball is embedded in its own pitch mark in the fairway and whose stance is in temporary water. This is a great one. This was a question of itself, and I kind of bundled it down into one answer. A player whose ball is embedded in its own pitch mark in the fairway and whose stance is in temporary water may take relief from either 1, the temporary water, or 2, the embedded ball at his option, but not from both conditions in one single procedure. I can get relief from one or the other, and then after having attempted or taking relief and dropping from one and having interference from the other, if I then drop from that second condition and I find myself back in the first condition, then I can take simultaneous relief. And if you want to look, a great interpretation to know is interpretation 16.1/3, and that would apply to several different conditions on the course, and it could apply to certain local rules in a condition. So be careful. That's a great question. This is another kind of trick question. That's a great example of playing from a wrong place. Under Rule 16, in stroke play, a player strikes his or her ball into an area of temporary water that is adjacent to a yellow penalty area. Might be an overflow, but it's temporary water. And just like Dan said last week or the week before, don't start assuming things. Just read what the words say. So this says, I'm in temporary water that's located by a yellow penalty area. The player mistakenly thinks that the temporary water is part of the yellow penalty area. Abandoning the original ball that the player could have easily retrieved, he or she puts another ball into play by dropping it 10 yards behind the temporary water under essentially the penalty area relief rule and plays it. So what is the ruling? So my ball was lying in temporary water. So what rule applies if I'm not going to play it as it lies? The abnormal course condition. It was retrievable. So what am I required to do? I'm required to determine my nearest point of complete relief because I know the location of the ball. It's only when the ball has not been found in the condition do I use where it last crossed. So I'm required to find the nearest point of complete relief. 10 yards behind the temporary water clearly is a lot further away, and I'm definitely playing from a wrong place under the abnormal course condition. So what is the ruling? Have I proceeded properly and get no penalty? Okay. Did I play from a wrong place? Yeah. So the answer is simply, I get the general penalty. The fact that I substituted a ball is absolutely immaterial. In proceeding under the penalty area rule that I thought I was proceeding under, or the abnormal course condition rule that I should have been proceeding under, in either case, I'm allowed to substitute a ball. So there's no penalty for substituting a ball. And if we're disqualifying a player from playing from a wrong place, it's going to be a tough sport because we're not going to have many people left in it. So that's all for this week. Again, hopefully, pace of play might be better. But anyway, our next session, for all of your information, is next Thursday, not next Friday, at 8 a.m. Right back here. And I know Thomas will be sending out an email either later this afternoon or first thing Monday for you all to sign up to either come in here or to follow online. And we want to thank you all again for taking part in these sessions, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you.